The weathered cuneiform tablets discovered in the ruins of Nippur between 1888 and 1900 contain some of the most enigmatic references to primordial events ever found in Mesopotamian literature. Among the thousands of fragments catalogued by the University of Pennsylvania expeditions, one particular group of ancient Sumerian texts stands out for its unusual content, describing what scholars have called the time before time. These tablets, dating back to around 2600 BCE, but clearly rooted in much older oral traditions, represent humanity's first documented attempts to record the memories of events that preceded the establishment of civilization itself. The most significant of these tablets, designated as CBS in the University Museum collection, holds a detailed narrative written in archaic Sumerian script that differs drastically from the administrative documents of its day. The text doesn't begin with the usual invocation to known deities. Instead, it opens with a description of a period of emptiness, a time when the heavens and the earth had not yet been named, when fresh water and salt water mingled in a primordial chaos. What makes this document so deeply intriguing is its factual tone. It presents cosmic events with the exact same administrative precision usually reserved for logging grain inventories or real estate transactions. The archaeological evidence of Eridu, considered by the Sumerians themselves to be the very first city ever built, provides a physical context for these textual accounts. Excavations led by the Iraqi Department of Antiquities have revealed 17 distinct layers of construction. The deepest levels hold architectural knowledge that seems to have emerged fully formed, rather than through any gradual development. The oldest structures demonstrate a highly sophisticated understanding of orientation, proportion, and building techniques that would go on to influence Mesopotamian architecture for millennia to come. The alignment between these physical ruins and the written descriptions of primordial founding activities suggests something profound. It implies that these ancient records are preserving genuine historical memories, rather than purely mythological constructs. The Eridu Genesis, one of the oldest known creation narratives in human history, contains passages that describe the conditions right before a recognizable cosmic order was established. This ancient text, preserved in fragments on tablets from the Old Babylonian period, but obviously based on much older Sumerian sources, begins by describing an era when heaven and earth had not yet been separated. Vegetation had not yet appeared. The primordial waters of the Abzu and Tiamat existed in a single, undifferentiated blend. The precision with which these cosmological conditions are described suggests that the text holds genuine knowledge about the processes of planetary formation, rather than just abstract philosophical speculation about our cosmic origins. The text, designated as MS 30080 in the Ashmolean Museum collection, opens with a remarkably specific picture of these primordial conditions. The opening lines declare that when the sky was moved away from the earth, when the earth was separated from the sky, when the name of man was fixed, when the sky god, Anu, carried off the heavens, and the air god, Enlil, carried off the earth. This description frames cosmic formation not as a mystical creation out of nothing, but as a deliberate process of separation and differentiation from pre-existing materials. The language used here mirrors what modern planetary science describes as differentiation, the process by which a planet's materials separate into distinct layers based on their density and composition. The archaeological context for these cosmological texts emerges from the excavations conducted at Eridu by Fuad Safar and Seton Lloyd, between 1946 and 1949. The deepest building levels of the site, dating back to around 5000 BCE, revealed temple structures oriented to precise cardinal alignments. This points to a sophisticated astronomical knowledge from the very beginning of the settlement. The architectural continuity across 17 successive building phases tells us that later Sumerians saw themselves as the guardians of traditions established during that primordial time. Every reconstruction preserved the exact orientation and proportional ratios of the older structures, suggesting that architectural knowledge was treated as a sacred inheritance, not as an evolving technology. The Eridu Genesis describes the primordial waters with a technical precision that goes far beyond typical mythological tales. The text draws a sharp distinction between the Abzu, representing fresh water, and Tiamat, representing salt water. It describes their mixing as a primordial condition that preceded cosmic organization. This distinction shows a real grasp of hydrology and the natural separation between fresh and saltwater systems. Modern geological analysis of Mesopotamian groundwater systems reveals complex interactions between freshwater aquifers and saline intrusion from the Persian Gulf, conditions that remained directly observable by those ancient inhabitants. The text's heavy focus on these aquatic systems suggests it is preserving environmental knowledge rather than abstract cosmological symbolism. The description of primordial conditions continues, with references to a total lack of vegetation, stating that no reed had grown, no tree had been created, no house had been built, and no city had been erected. This systematic inventory of absence lays down a baseline against which all later acts of creation can be measured. The ordering of these elements from natural features like reeds and trees to cultural constructs like houses and cities reflects a highly sophisticated understanding of the relationship between environmental conditions and the dawn of civilization. The text implies that cosmic organization unfolded in a logical sequence. The necessary natural conditions had to be firmly established before any cultural achievements could even become possible. Chemical analysis of the clay tablets holding the Eridu Genesis reveals that the writing mediums themselves are tied to the very primordial waters described in the text. The clay used for these tablets came from alluvial deposits formed by the Euphrates River materials born from the mingling of freshwater sediments and marine deposits. This physical link between the writing surface and the cosmological story suggests the Sumerian scribes understood their creation narrative as a description of actual geological processes that shaped their world. The tablets themselves are physical proof of the primordial mixture they describe. The Eridu Genesis preserves references to the divine decision-making processes that came before cosmic organization. The text describes how the great gods gathered in an assembly and debated the ordering of the cosmos, showing that creation involved deliberation and planning rather than spontaneous generation. This depiction of an organized divine council echoes the administrative structures documented in later Sumerian government archives. It suggests that cosmic organization was understood through the lens of human institutional procedures. The alignment between divine and human administrative methods implies that the Sumerians viewed cosmic governance as following rational protocols, rather than just the arbitrary whims of the gods. Linguistic analysis of the Eridu Genesis, conducted by Samuel Noah Kramer during his exhaustive study of Sumerian literature in the 1950s, revealed that the text employs technical terminology usually associated with engineering and construction, rather than religious or mythological discourse. The words describing cosmic formation stem from roots meaning to measure, to set in place, and to establish boundaries. This exact vocabulary, which frequently appears in administrative texts dealing with land surveying and building construction, supports the interpretation that the text is preserving technical knowledge about cosmic organization, rather than purely religious mythology. The primordial waters described in the Eridu Genesis are given even more detail in related texts that specify their characteristics and behaviors. The text known as Enki and Ninhursag describes how the god Enki organized these primordial waters, separating them into distinct bodies and establishing their proper flows and boundaries. The precision of these hydraulic descriptions, including references to water volumes, flow rates, and containment systems, demonstrates a firm grasp of fluid dynamics and water management principles. Archaeological evidence of ancient Sumerian irrigation systems reveals a sophisticated hydraulic engineering that could only have been developed through a deep understanding of how water behaves, paired with the systematic application of engineering principles. Sumerian cosmological texts describe a time before names were given to the great gods. A time when divine beings existed in an undifferentiated state, without specific identities or assigned functions. Fragments of tablets from Nippur describe this primordial condition as the time of the nameless ones, entities holding divine essence but lacking the individual traits that would later define the Anunnaki pantheon. The text indicates that the process of naming was far more than a simple linguistic label. Instead, it was a fundamental transformation. It assigned specific responsibilities, territories, and capabilities to the divine beings who would go on to shape the emerging cosmic order. The concept of divine naming appears on tablet CBS 11652 from the University of Pennsylvania Museum, which describes the assembly of primordial gods, gathering for the very purpose of receiving names and assigned functions. The text uses formulaic language, declaring that in those days the gods had not yet been called by name, and destinies had not yet been decreed. This description treats naming as a transformative act, one that shifted latent divine potential into an actualized cosmic function. The parallel between divine naming and human administrative appointments suggests the Sumerians understood cosmic organization through bureaucratic metaphors pulled straight from their own sophisticated government systems. The nameless gods are the subject of detailed descriptions in texts discovered during Leonard Woolley's excavations at Ur between 1922 and 1934. These tablets, dating to around 2000 BCE, describe the primordial deities as possessing a radiance or quasi-divine power, yet lacking the me, the fundamental decrees that would define their specific roles and abilities. This sharp distinction between inherent divine essence and functional assignment points to a highly sophisticated theological mindset regarding the nature of divinity and cosmic organization. The text suggests that divine power needed to be properly channeled through assigned functions in order to become effective in cosmic governance. The process of differentiation through naming gets a mathematical treatment in Sumerian numerical texts, which assign specific values to different deities based on their cosmic roles. Anu, the god of the sky, receives the number 60, representing his supreme position. Enlil, the god of the air, gets the number 50, indicating his subordinate but absolutely crucial role. Enki, the god of water, receives the number 40, reflecting his place as third in the main divine triad. These numerical assignments were not arbitrary symbolic tags. They functioned as operational codes within Sumerian mathematical and astronomical calculations. The consistency of these divine numbers across multiple types of texts proves their integration into practical calculation systems. Archaeological evidence from the temple archives of Girsu reveals administrative texts that actually use these divine numerical codes in accounting procedures, proving that theological concepts had direct practical applications. Tablets from the 3rd dynasty of Ur, dating to around 2000 BCE, record temple inventories, using the divine numbers as calculation multipliers and organizational categories. This seamless integration of theological and administrative systems indicates that divine differentiation, through naming and numerical assignment, served functional purposes far beyond simple religious symbolism. The transformation of nameless gods into named deities seems deeply tied to the establishment of cosmic time in Sumerian texts. The Barton cylinder, discovered at Nippur and now housed in the University Museum, describes how divine naming occurred when the year was created, when the month was named, and when the day was established. This temporal sequencing suggests that divine differentiation and the establishment of time were deeply interconnected processes, both absolutely necessary to transform primordial chaos into an organized cosmos. The text implies that time itself emerged through the process of distinguishing and naming discrete cosmic functions. Linguistic analysis reveals that Sumerian divine names often encode functional descriptions rather than arbitrary personal names. Enlil derives from En, meaning Lord, and Lil, meaning wind or breath, directly describing his cosmic function as Lord of the atmosphere. Enki combines En with Ki, meaning earth, identifying him as the Lord of the earth and the groundwater below it. This functional naming system suggests that divine identities were defined primarily by their cosmic responsibilities, rather than by personality traits. The practical nature of these names supports the interpretation that Sumerian theology was describing actual cosmic organization rather than just mythological personification. The differentiation of nameless gods into distinct divine personalities appears closely tied to territorial allocation in the texts describing primordial cosmic organization. The debate between Enlil and Enki, preserved in fragments on tablets from the Old Babylonian period, describes how cosmic domains were divided among the newly named deities. Each god received specific geographical territories, natural phenomena to govern, and technological domains to oversee. This systematic allocation created a divine administration that perfectly paralleled the Sumerian governmental structure. Each deity functioned as the cosmic governor of their assigned jurisdictions. The most constant element in the earliest Sumerian cosmological texts concerns the separation of heaven and earth from their original unified state. The Epic of Gilgamesh preserves references to this primordial division, describing how Anu took possession of the heavens, while Enlil claimed the earth, and Enki received the subterranean waters. This division doesn't appear as a single creative act, but rather as a systematic process of territorial allocation that established the fundamental structure of the cosmos. Archaeological evidence from temple complexes reveals architectural representations of this three-tiered cosmic model, with ziggurats serving as the physical connection between the separated realms. The separation process is treated in exquisite detail in the 11th tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, discovered during Hormuzd Rassam's excavations at Nineveh in 1853. The text describes how in ancient times, when the sky had been separated from the earth, when the earth had been delimited from the sky, when the names of mankind had been fixed, when Anu had carried off the heavens and Enlil had carried off the earth. This description presents the separation as a deliberate allocation rather than a violent rupture, highlighting the organizational aspects of cosmic formation. The parallel structure of the passage, with the repetition of the when clause, creates a logical sequence of events, progressing from physical separation to the assigning of names, and then to the assignment of functions. Archaeological evidence supporting this three-tiered cosmic model appears in the architecture of ziggurats across all of Mesopotamia. The Great Ziggurat, rebuilt by King Ur-Nammu around 2100 BCE, incorporated 7 distinct levels, representing the stages between earth and heaven. Excavations led by Leonard Woolley revealed that the structure's design followed precise mathematical proportions that encoded astronomical relationships and geometric principles. The base platform measured 210 feet by 140 feet, creating a 3:2 ratio that appears repeatedly in Sumerian sacred architecture. The height of approximately 70 feet established vertical relationships with the horizontal dimensions, reflecting the cosmological principles of the connection between heaven and earth. The separation of heaven and earth appears tied to the establishment of atmospheric phenomena in the texts describing Enlil's cosmic role. The Sumerian hymn to Enlil, preserved on tablets from Nippur, describes how the god established the barrier between heaven and earth, creating the atmospheric space where weather, winds, and storms could occur. This concept of the atmosphere as a middle realm between the upper and lower cosmic zones demonstrates a highly sophisticated understanding of vertical atmospheric structure. The text outlines specific atmospheric phenomena, including the generation of rain-wind patterns and cloud formation, pointing to a knowledge deeply rooted in the observation of meteorological processes. Mathematical texts from the Old Babylonian period reveal that the separation between heaven and earth was quantified using specific measurements integrated into Sumerian cosmological calculations. Tablet YBC 7289 from the Yale Babylonian collection contains calculations describing cosmic distances using the standard Sumerian unit, the dana, roughly equivalent to about 6 miles. The text specifies that the distance from the earth to the lower heaven measures specific multiples of this unit, creating a quantified cosmic geography that could be seamlessly integrated into astronomical calculations. This mathematical precision in describing the cosmic structure tells us that Sumerian cosmology relied on systematic measurements rather than vague mythological guesswork. Temple architecture across Mesopotamia incorporated physical representations of the heaven-earth division through the construction of subterranean chambers that perfectly complemented the upper structures of the temples. Excavations at Eridu revealed underground complexes that mirrored the surface buildings, creating an architectural embodiment of the three-tiered cosmic model. These underground chambers, carved right into the bedrock and lined with baked bricks, extended more than 12 feet below the temple's foundations. The chambers maintained permanent access to groundwater through sophisticated drainage systems that channeled the subterranean water while preventing the occupied spaces from flooding. This feat of engineering demonstrates the practical application of cosmological principles regarding the separated cosmic realms. The process of separation appears linked to the establishment of cosmic boundaries and measurement systems in the Sumerian texts. The myth of Enki and the world order describes how the god established the frontiers for heaven and earth, fixed their limits, and created the measurement systems that would govern cosmic organization. These boundaries were not merely spatial divisions. They included temporal frontiers, establishing the rhythms and cycles that would dictate celestial movements and earthly seasons. This blending of spatial and temporal boundaries indicates a profound understanding of space-time as a unified cosmic framework. Cylinder seal impressions from the early dynastic period, around 2900 BCE, depict the separation of heaven and earth using consistent iconographic motifs. These seals show a central vertical element, often represented as a stylized tree or a pillar connecting the upper and lower registers that represent heaven and earth. Figures appear in both registers, with celestial symbols in the upper zone and earthly scenes in the lower one. The consistency of this iconographic motif across hundreds of surviving seal impressions proves that the three-tiered cosmic model was absolutely fundamental to the Sumerian worldview and visual culture. The Abzu, described in Sumerian texts as the ocean of fresh water beneath the earth, receives detailed attention in the primordial narratives as one of the very first cosmic features to be established and defined. The records of the Eridu temple describe the Abzu as Enki's primary domain, an underground realm that served not only as a water source, but as a repository of knowledge and the bedrock of cosmic order. Excavations at Eridu have brought to light elaborate subterranean chambers that plunged deep into the earth, reaching the water table through sophisticated engineering that maintained permanent contact with underground water sources. The precision of these hydraulic installations suggests they were designed to replicate or physically connect with the primordial Abzu described in the cosmological texts. The Abzu temple at Eridu, dedicated to Enki, incorporated architectural features specifically designed to access and utilize this groundwater. Excavations led by Seton Lloyd between 1946 and 1949 revealed that the temple's foundations extended 25 feet below ground level, far deeper than structural requirements would have ever dictated. The deep foundation chambers featured channels carved into the bedrock that directed the flow of groundwater into central collection basins. These basins remained perpetually full, thanks to careful management of access to the water table, creating permanent water features within the temple complex that represented physical, tangible connections to the primordial Abzu. Chemical analysis of the water from the Eridu temple basins over the years has revealed unusual mineral compositions that set this groundwater apart from normal aquifers in the region. High concentrations of specific trace minerals, including lithium and strontium, indicated that the water originated from deep geological formations rather than shallow groundwater. This chemical signature backs up the textual descriptions of the Abzu as a distinct water source, completely separate from normal surface and subsurface systems. The temple's hydraulic engineering specifically targeted these deep water sources, suggesting that access to the primordial water of the Abzu was considered utterly essential to the temple's operation. Sumerian hymns to Enki describe the Abzu as the foundation of wisdom, a place where the god held an exhaustive knowledge of all arts and sciences. The text known as Enki and the World Order describes how the god stored the Me, the fundamental cosmic principles deep inside the Abzu, guarding them safely within his sacred sanctuary. This concept of the Abzu as a vessel of knowledge transforms it from a simple water source into a cosmic library and archive. The physical chambers of the temple that access the Abzu's water may have housed actual archives and repositories of knowledge, creating earthly reflections of the cosmic data storage described in the mythological texts. Archaeological evidence supports this interpretation through the discovery of tablet archives in temple chambers closely associated with these water features. The temple library at Eridu, discovered during early 20th century excavations, held thousands of cuneiform tablets stored in rooms directly adjacent to the Abzu access points. These tablets included mathematical texts, astronomical observations, medical formulas, and ritual instructions, forming comprehensive systems of knowledge. The sheer physical proximity of data storage to the Abzu water access suggests a deeply intentional link between the symbolism of water and the preservation of information. The engineering sophistication of the Abzu access systems went far beyond the practical needs of a simple water supply, indicating that these installations served ceremonial and symbolic functions well beyond pure utility. The rock-cut channels followed curved paths rather than straight lines, incorporating precise geometric relationships that served absolutely no hydraulic purpose. These curved channels created flow patterns that generated specific acoustic effects as the water moved through them, producing resonant tones inside the temple chambers. The intentional design of these acoustic properties suggests that the Abzu hydraulic installations were meticulously crafted to create multi-sensory experiences, elevating the ritual and ceremonial activities. The texts describing the Abzu emphasize its role as the bedrock of stability and cosmic order. The Sumerian term Abzu translates literally to deep water or knowledge of water, reflecting the dual meaning of groundwater as both a physical resource and a metaphysical foundation. This linguistic tie between water and knowledge appears across all Sumerian religious and technical texts, showing that hydraulic and epistemological concepts were fundamentally linked in the Sumerian mind. The management of water resources and the organization of knowledge systems followed parallel principles of collection, storage, control, and distribution. The Abzu undergoes further cosmological development in texts describing its relationship with the upper waters of the sky. The Sumerian flood narrative, preserved in the Eridu Genesis, describes how the waters from above and the waters from below were originally connected, then separated during primordial organization, only to be capable of reuniting during catastrophic events. This view of cosmic hydrology, as involving both subterranean and celestial water sources, demonstrates an understanding of the complete hydrological cycle, including precipitation, surface water, groundwater, and atmospheric water vapor. The sophistication of this hydrological model goes far beyond what anyone would expect from a society supposedly in the earliest stages of its scientific development. Sumerian astronomical texts describe the establishment of timekeeping as a deliberate act of cosmic organization that took place during the primordial period. The text, known as the astrolabe, preserves calculations that divide the year into specific periods, establish the relationships between lunar and solar cycles, and create mathematical frameworks for tracking celestial movements. These calendar systems appear completely developed in the oldest texts. rather than showing any kind of gradual evolution. This suggests they were established according to predetermined mathematical principles. The precision of Sumerian timekeeping, including their base 60 numerical system, which we still use today to measure time and angles, points to an access to highly sophisticated astronomical knowledge from the very dawn of recorded history. The astrolabe text, catalogued as Tablet K in the British Museum collection, contains astronomical data organized into 12 monthly sections corresponding to the Sumerian calendar year. Each section lists the specific stars visible during that month, describes their positions relative to the horizon and the zenith, and provides calculations to determine the optimal times for observation. The mathematical exactness of these astronomical tables indicates systematic observation programs spanning multiple generations. The consistency of the stellar positional data across different copies of the texts proves that Sumerian astronomers maintained standardized observation protocols and measurement techniques that guaranteed the accuracy and reproducibility of their results. The base 60 numerical system used in Sumerian timekeeping appears fully formed in the oldest mathematical texts, without a single shred of evidence showing developmental stages or alternative systems. Tablets from the early dynastic period, dating to around 2700 BCE, use this notation with the exact same sophistication found in much later Babylonian astronomical texts. This sudden appearance of advanced mathematical notation suggests the numerical system was either inherited or revealed, rather than developed gradually through trial and error. The sheer utility of base 60 for astronomical calculations, especially its divisibility by multiple factors, indicates that the system was designed specifically for technical computation, rather than just everyday counting. Archaeological evidence from temple complexes reveals architectural elements built for precise astronomical observation and timekeeping. The ziggurat at Uruk incorporated sightlines oriented toward the specific rising and setting positions of stars that marked seasonal transitions and calendar divisions. Excavations of the summit platform have uncovered mounting points for observation equipment and carved alignment markers that allowed for precise angular measurements. These architectural observatories prove that timekeeping involved systematic instrumental observation rather than just casual stargazing. The division of day and night into 12 hours each, totaling the 24-hour day, still used globally, finds its origin in Sumerian astronomical practice. The texts describe how the daytime was divided into 12 dana periods, each corresponding to the time required for specific stellar movements. The night was similarly divided into 12 watches, with specific stars designated as watch markers. This system of temporal division integrated the measurement of solar and stellar time, creating a comprehensive framework that maintained precision across different observation methods. The sophistication of this integrated timekeeping system points to an advanced understanding of celestial mechanics and rotational dynamics. The Sumerian calendar integrated both lunar and solar elements, requiring complex intercalation procedures to keep the phases of the moon synchronized with seasonal solar cycles. Administrative texts from the temple archives document the mathematical calculations used to determine exactly when extra months needed to be inserted to prevent calendar drift. These intercalation calculations employed sophisticated mathematical techniques, including modular arithmetic and the recognition of cyclical patterns. The precision of Sumerian intercalation kept the calendar accurate to within a single day over 19-year periods, an exactness that rivals modern calendar systems. The establishment of timekeeping appears closely tied to agricultural planning and ritual scheduling in Sumerian administrative texts. Temple calendars specified the optimal dates for planting and harvesting, the timing for irrigation, and the schedules for religious festivals, with a precision that demanded exact astronomical time measurement. The weaving together of agricultural ritual and astronomical time systems created comprehensive temporal frameworks that organized every single aspect of Sumerian society. This integration proves that timekeeping served vital practical functions far beyond abstract astronomical curiosity. The mathematical relationship between lunar months and solar years is treated in great detail in Sumerian astronomical texts through calculations of the Metonic cycle, a 19-year period after which lunar phases repeat on the exact same days of the solar calendar. Tablet B, M, 36,791, contains calculations proving that 235 lunar months equal exactly 19 solar years, allowing for perfect calendar synchronization. The discovery of this mathematical relationship, not officially recognized in Western astronomy until the Greek astronomer Meton in 432 BCE, proves that Sumerian astronomers possessed a highly sophisticated understanding of long-period astronomical cycles, millennia before these relationships were supposedly recognized for the first time. The sheer precision required to identify the Metonic cycle through observation and calculation points to systematic astronomical programs spanning multiple generations of observers who maintained consistent measurement standards and compiled data over incredibly long periods. The concept of fixing the destiny appears repeatedly in Sumerian primordial narratives as a fundamental organizing principle established during cosmic creation. The Tablets of Destinies, described as holding the fundamental laws governing reality itself, were reputed to have been created during this initial period to set the proper order of all things. Administrative texts from Nippur describe New Year's ceremonies that actually reenacted this primordial fixing of destiny, suggesting the Sumerians understood cosmic order as something that required periodic renewal and reaffirmation. The mathematical precision with which these destinies were calculated, integrating astronomical cycles and mathematical constants, indicates that destiny wasn't an arbitrary divine whim, but the systematic application of natural law. The Tablets of Destinies appear throughout Mesopotamian literature as physical objects possessing extraordinary power over cosmic and earthly affairs. The Epic of Abzu, preserved in multiple versions from the Old Babylonian period right through to the Neo-Assyrian era, describes these tablets as granting their possessor supreme authority over the fundamental operations of the universe. The text states that whoever holds the Tablet of Destinies controls the decrees of all the gods, indicating that cosmic governance operated through documented protocols rather than spontaneous divine action. This concept of a cosmic administration run via written decrees establishes a striking parallel with Sumerian governmental practices, where authority flowed directly from the possession of official administrative documents. Archaeological evidence from Nippur reveals the central importance of fixing destiny in Sumerian religious practice, thanks to the discovery of ritual texts describing the Akkitu, or New Year's festival. Tablets unearthed during the University of Pennsylvania expeditions document the elaborate ceremonies held every single year to renew the cosmic order. These ceremonies included ritual recitations of the primordial fixing of destiny, symbolic reenactments of cosmic creation, and formal proclamations re-establishing divine and royal authority for the coming year. The consistency of these ritual texts across several centuries proves that the renewal of destiny was viewed as absolutely essential to maintaining cosmic stability. The mathematical component of fixing destiny becomes blindingly apparent through astronomical texts that calculate the optimal timing for these renewal ceremonies. Tablet CBS 11652 holds calculations determining exactly when specific stellar configurations would align with calendar dates, creating the most auspicious moments to conduct the destiny-fixing rituals. These calculations utilized highly sophisticated astronomical knowledge, including precession corrections, planetary position predictions, and eclipse cycle calculations. The precision required for these astronomical timing calculations tells us that fixing destiny involved rigorous technical procedures rather than arbitrary ritual actions. The concept of Namtar, the Sumerian term for destiny or fate, derives from roots meaning that which is decreed, highlighting the administrative and quantitative aspects of cosmic organization. Temple administrative texts employ Namtar terminology in contexts involving resource allocation work assignments and territorial boundaries, proving that concepts of destiny had very practical applications in Sumerian governance. This linguistic link between cosmic fate and earthly administration suggests the Sumerians understood the universal order as following principles remarkably similar to those governing human society. The fixing of destinies appears tied to the establishment of cosmic time cycles in texts describing how divine decrees were perfectly synchronized with astronomical periods. The myth of Enlil and Ninlil describes how destinies were fixed according to the movements of celestial bodies. Specific divine decrees corresponded to lunar phases, the rising and setting times of stars and planetary positions. This integration of destiny with astronomical cycles created a deterministic cosmology where future events could actually be predicted through celestial observation and mathematical calculation. The sophistication of this predictive system demonstrates an advanced grasp of cyclical patterns in both natural and social phenomena. Administrative records from the temple archives reveal that human destinies were also considered subject to cosmic decree. Individual life paths were determined by the exact moment of birth and the prevailing astrological configurations. Tablets from the Old Babylonian period document birth records, including precise information on the exact time of birth used to draw up natal predictions. These astrological texts employed the exact same mathematical techniques and astronomical data used for cosmic destiny calculations, indicating that personal fate and universal order were understood to operate on the exact same constant principles. The systematic nature of these predictive calculations suggests that Sumerian concepts of destiny integrated genuine statistical patterns derived from long-term observation of the correlations between celestial events and earthly outcomes. The periodic renewal of destinies through ritual reenactment seems designed to correct accumulated errors and prevent cosmic drift from the ideal models. Temple texts describe how the annual New Year ceremonies functioned as calibration procedures that reset cosmic operations back to their primordial blueprints. This concept of periodic recalibration echoes our modern understanding of how complex systems require regular adjustments just to maintain optimal performance. The Sumerian recognition that cosmic order requires active maintenance rather than passive continuation demonstrates a deeply sophisticated way of thinking about systems dynamics and entropy. The tablets of destinies are physically described in texts that detail their material composition and construction techniques. The Epic of Abzu describes the tablets as being fashioned from lapis lazuli and precious stones, materials chosen for their durability and heavy symbolic weight. However, references to tablets glowing with an inner light and emitting sounds when activated suggest they incorporated technological components far beyond a simple inscribed stone. These descriptions match the characteristics of crystalline materials known to possess piezoelectric properties. This raises fascinating questions about whether the legendary tablets of destinies represented advanced technological devices rather than just simple written documents. Sumerian king lists and cosmological texts invariably describe the establishment of cities as happening during the primordial period under direct divine supervision. Eridu receives special attention as the very first city created according to divine blueprints that long preceded human civilization. Archaeological excavations at Eridu reveal an urban planning and architectural sophistication that simply appears out of nowhere in the archaeological record, with no clear developmental stages. The oldest structures show an advanced grasp of orientation, drainage, and construction techniques that would characterize Mesopotamian urban centers for thousands of years. This sudden burst of urban sophistication backs up the textual accounts describing cities as divine establishments, rather than gradual, human-led developments. The Sumerian King List states explicitly that after kingship had descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu, establishing the city as the primordial seat of civilized governance. This phrasing frames urban civilization as a divine gift rather than a human innovation, with cities designed according to celestial models. Archaeological investigation at Eridu by Fuad Safar and Seton Lloyd revealed that the earliest settlement level, dating to around 5400 BCE, already demonstrated sophisticated urban planning principles. The settlement's layout incorporated a network of regular streets, designated zones for different activities, and centralized temple complexes that would define Mesopotamian urbanism throughout its entire history. The architectural sophistication of early Eridu becomes glaringly obvious when looking at the temple construction techniques, which far exceeded the practical needs of simple religious structures. The oldest temple, designated as Temple 1 in the archaeological reports, integrated baked brick construction at depths where structural necessity would have easily allowed for sun-dried mud bricks. The use of baked bricks, which required a massive expenditure of fuel and technical expertise, suggests the construction followed prescribed specifications, rather than just responding to practical constraints. The temple's orientation aligned perfectly with the cardinal directions, requiring astronomical observation capabilities and surveying techniques that conventional archaeology considers far too advanced for such a remote period. Excavations at the deepest levels of Eridu brought to light evidence of sophisticated drainage systems that managed groundwater and prevented structural damage from seasonal flooding. These drainage installations integrated principles of slope calculation, water flow management, and materials engineering that prove a comprehensive understanding of hydraulic principles. The rock-cut drainage channels, lined with bitumen-sealed bricks, created permanent systems that functioned flawlessly for centuries. The engineering knowledge required for these installations far exceeds what should have been available to a supposedly nascent urban culture, reinforcing the textual claims that these cities were established according to advanced divine blueprints. The sudden appearance of writing in the earliest urban sites presents yet another anomaly that challenges conventional models of gradual cultural development. The oldest cuneiform tablets from Uruk, dating to around 3200 BCE, showcase a sign system and sophisticated administrative protocols that appear fully formed. These early texts include complex accounting procedures, grammatical structures, and a specialized technical vocabulary, indicating that the writing system was mature rather than experimental. The lack of developmental stages in early writing aligns perfectly with the lack of architectural development at Eridu, suggesting that writing, much like urban planning, was introduced as a complete system rather than emerging through incremental innovation. The distribution of the first cities across southern Mesopotamia follows patterns that suggest coordinated planning rather than random settlement. The great Sumerian cities of Eridu, Ur, Uruk, Larsa, and Nippur were positioned at regular intervals along navigable waterways, creating networks that optimized trade communication and resource distribution. The spacing between these cities averages about 25 miles a distance. That represents a single day's journey and creates highly efficient territorial organization. This regular distribution pattern points to systematic planning that coordinated multiple urban foundations according to comprehensive regional development strategies. Temple hymns preserve traditions describing the divine planning sessions that preceded the founding of these cities. The text, known as the Temple Hymns, compiled by the priestess Enheduanna around 2300 BCE, but clearly based on much older traditions, describes how each great city was assigned specific functions within the cosmic order. Eridu was designated as the seat of wisdom and water management, Nippur as the administrative hub, Ur as the center of justice and law, and Uruk as the seat of divine kingship. This functional specialization created an integrated urban network where different cities played complementary roles, rather than competing for the exact same functions. Archaeological evidence supports this functional specialization through the discovery of city-specific industries and institutional focuses. Excavations at Ur have revealed vast judicial archives and legal facilities, confirming its role as a center of law. The temple complexes of Nippur contained massive administrative archives documenting regional governance, validating its administrative function. This archaeological confirmation of the urban functions described by the texts proves that the Sumerian narratives of city foundations preserved genuine historical information rather than mythological inventions. Architectural standardization across early Sumerian cities indicates the spread of shared construction knowledge and builder protocols. Temple complexes at different sites employed identical proportional ratios, orientation principles, and construction techniques, even though they were supposedly founded by independent communities. This standardization suggests that urban construction followed codified architectural principles handed down by central authorities or repositories of knowledge. The consistency of these building standards over vast geographic areas and long time periods proves the existence of systematic networks for preserving and transmitting knowledge. The Me. The fundamental decrees or principles that governed every aspect of existence received detailed attention in Sumerian primordial texts as essential elements established during cosmic creation. The myth of Enki and Inanna preserves a list of over 100 Me covering domains ranging from kingship and priesthood to warfare and sexuality. These were not abstract concepts, but concrete powers that could be possessed, transferred, or stolen, functioning as operational protocols for civilized existence. The systematic nature of the Me catalog and its coverage of both cosmic and cultural domains suggests it preserved genuine knowledge about the fundamental organizing principles established during the primordial period. The list of the Me preserved in the story of Enki and Inanna, pieced together from multiple tablet fragments discovered at Nippur and Ur, contains specific categories that reveal a highly sophisticated understanding of the building blocks of civilization. The list includes lordship, godship, the exalted and enduring crown, the throne of kingship, the exalted scepter, the royal insignia, the exalted shrine, shepherdship, and kingship. These political and religious Me are followed by specialized functions, including the descent into the underworld, the ascent from the underworld, the art of lovemaking, the kissing of the phallus, prostitution, as well as various musical instruments and performances. The exhaustive nature of this catalog demonstrates that Sumerian thinkers had broken civilization down into its constituent elements, understanding cultural complexity as something built from distinct functional components. The concept of the Me as transferable powers appears throughout Sumerian literature, in stories describing how these principles moved between deities and cities. The myth of Inanna and Enki describes how the goddess Inanna traveled to Eridu and obtained the Me from Enki through trickery, transporting them back to her city of Uruk. The text provides detailed descriptions of how the Me were physically loaded onto the boat of heaven for transport, suggesting they were understood as tangible objects rather than abstract concepts. This materialization of cultural principles indicates that the Sumerians conceived of civilization as being built from concrete components that could be acquired, lost, or transferred. Administrative texts from the temple archives reveal that the concepts of the Me had very practical applications in Sumerian institutional organization. Temple inventories list specific Me as the possessions of particular shrines, with priests assigned the heavy responsibility of maintaining and protecting these cosmic principles. Ritual texts described activation ceremonies for specific Me, indicating that these principles required deliberate invocation rather than just functioning automatically. The procedural nature of activating the Me suggests they operated like operational protocols governing institutional activities according to standardized procedures. The mathematical organization of the Me list reveals a systematic categorization according to cosmic and social hierarchies. Over 100 Me are grouped into categories that progress from fundamental cosmic principles to governmental structures, all the way down to specialized trades and cultural practices. This hierarchical organization demonstrates profound thinking about the relationships between different components of civilization and their relative importance in maintaining social order. The systematic nature of this categorization tells us that the list of the me represented a genuine analysis of civilization, rather than a random accumulation of cultural elements. Linguistic analysis of the terminology surrounding the me reveals that the Sumerian word derives from roots suggesting a central nature or a fundamental identity. The exact same linguistic root appears in the words for being, existence, and permanent characteristics, indicating that the me represented essential defining properties rather than temporary attributes. This linguistic link supports the interpretation of the me as fundamental organizing principles rather than contingent cultural practices. The permanence implied by the terminology of the me suggests the Sumerians understood these principles as eternal cosmic laws rather than human inventions subject to change. The transmission of the me through teaching and revelation appears as a recurring theme in Sumerian wisdom literature. The texts describe how knowledge of the me was passed from the gods to kings and from kings to priests through formal instruction involving memorization, ritual practice, and initiation into mysteries. The educational procedures described for the transmission of the me perfectly parallel the training programs documented in the texts of the temple schools, suggesting that knowledge of the me was preserved through institutional educational systems. The formalization of the me instruction indicates the Sumerians recognized the absolute necessity of systematic knowledge preservation to maintain the continuity of civilization. The relationship between the me and cosmic order becomes explicit in texts describing how the violation of these principles caused massive disruptions in natural and social systems. The Curse of Akkad describes how the destruction of the temples carrying the me led to agricultural failure, social chaos, and cosmic disorder. This narrative frames the me as essential components for maintaining universal stability. Their disruption caused cascading failures across multiple domains. The systematic description of the fallout following the violation of the me demonstrates a deep understanding of the complex interdependencies within civilizational and cosmic systems. The preservation of the knowledge of the me through written documentation appears as a primary function of the temple scribal institutions. The archives of Nippur and other major centers held exhaustive catalogs of the me ritual instructions for their activation, and historical records tracking the transfer of me between cities and deities. The incredible care taken to preserve the documentation on the me, including the production of multiple copies and their storage in protected archives, proves that this knowledge was considered utterly essential to the survival of civilization. The institutional infrastructure dedicated to preserving the me shows that Sumerian society invested massive resources into maintaining the knowledge systems inherited from the primordial period. Sumerian texts describe a great flood that occurred during the primordial period, marking a fundamental dividing line between the antediluvian and post-diluvian eras. The Eridu Genesis holds the oldest written account of this flood, describing how the god Enki warned the priest-king Ziusudra of the impending catastrophe and gave him detailed instructions for building a survival vessel. The sheer precision of these construction specifications, including exact measurements and materials, suggests the text preserves technical knowledge rather than mythological invention. Geological evidence from Mesopotamian archaeological sites reveals flood deposits dating to around 2900 BCE that perfectly match the textual descriptions, indicating that the flood tradition preserved the memory of a very real catastrophic event. The flood narrative of the Eridu Genesis describes the divine decision to wipe out humanity through a catastrophic inundation. The text pins this decision on overpopulation and excessive human noise, disturbing the divine rest, presenting the flood as a brutal population control measure rather than a moral punishment. This highly pragmatic explanation for a cosmic catastrophe differs sharply from later flood narratives, which emphasize divine judgment of human wickedness. The practical, rather than ethical framing of the flood's cause suggests the text held on to the memory of genuine crisis management decisions, rather than functioning as a moral allegory. The construction specifications provided to Ziusudra showcase a sophisticated knowledge of naval architecture baked right into the flood narrative. The text describes the vessel as a cube measuring 120 cubits on each side, roughly 195 feet in every dimension. This cubic design creates extraordinary stability in turbulent waters, while maximizing internal volume for storing supplies and specimens. Modern naval engineering analysis confirms that cubic vessels, while totally impractical for normal navigation, offer optimal stability characteristics for surviving extreme sea conditions. The technical sophistication of these specifications suggests they stem from authentic engineering knowledge rather than mythological imagination. The materials list for the vessel's construction includes specific types of wood, particular grades of bitumen for waterproofing, and precise quantities of rigging. The text specifies that the vessel had to be divided into 7 levels, each subdivided into compartments, creating a highly systematic organization of internal space. These construction details mirror the level of specificity found in actual Mesopotamian building contracts, suggesting the flood narrative preserves genuine technical documents. The practical nature of these specifications confirms the interpretation of the flood narrative as a vessel preserving the institutional memory of actual disaster preparedness protocols. Archaeological evidence of catastrophic flooding early in Mesopotamian history appears right in the stratigraphic layers of several sites in southern Iraq. Excavations at Ur, led by Leonard Woolley between 1922 and 1934, unearthed a layer of sterile clay about 8 feet thick, separating the earlier occupation levels from the later Sumerian civilization. This flood deposit, dated by stratigraphic analysis to around 2900 BCE, contains absolutely no cultural material, indicating a period of total abandonment. Similar flood deposits appear at Uruk-Kish and Shuruppak, proving that catastrophic flooding hit the entire southern Mesopotamian plain during this period. The sheer extent and depth of these archaeological deposits point to water levels and flow velocities that far exceeded normal river floods. The composition of the sediments includes materials transported from sources hundreds of miles away, indicating an extraordinary movement of water across the entire region. Geological analysis suggests the floods resulted from a perfect storm of combined factors: exceptionally high river flow, a massive surge from the Persian Gulf, and possible seismic activity that disrupted normal drainage patterns. The catastrophic nature of these floods would have wiped out all surface settlements and demanded a complete reconstruction of urban infrastructure. The correlation between the textual chronology of the flood and the archaeological flood deposits offers a remarkable confirmation of historical memory preserved in Sumerian literature. The Sumerian King List, places the flood squarely between the reigns of the antediluvian and post-diluvian kings, creating a chronological framework that the archaeological evidence directly validates. This match between textual tradition and physical proof demonstrates that Sumerian flood narratives preserve authentic historical memories passed down from generation to generation through oral tradition before ever taking written form. The survival instructions provided in the flood narrative include specifications for preserving animal species and seed stocks, showing a deep concern for agricultural recovery after the catastrophe. The text describes how Ziusudra brought aboard representatives of all living creatures and preserved seeds from all plants, creating biological reservoirs to repopulate the devastated landscape. This systematic approach to preserving biodiversity shows a highly sophisticated understanding of ecological relationships and the exact conditions required to rebuild complex agricultural systems. The practical focus on agricultural recovery backs up the interpretation of the flood narratives as the preservation of disaster management protocols rather than pure religious mythology. The post-flood reorganization described in Sumerian texts includes the re-establishment of cities, the redistribution of divine authority, and the renewal of cosmic order. The Eridu Genesis describes how Ziusudra received divine blessing and eternal life as a reward for preserving civilization through the catastrophe. This narrative framework presents the flood not as the end of civilization, but as a hard reset, eliminating accumulated problems while safely preserving essential knowledge and genetic stock for renewed development. The cyclical view of civilization's development, implicit in this flood narrative, shows a profound reflection on long-term cultural dynamics and the very real possibility of recovery after a catastrophic disruption. The Sumerian King List documents the rulers who governed before the Great Flood, granting them reigns of extraordinary length, measured in tens of thousands of years. These antediluvian kings ruled from cities like Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larik, Sippar, and Shuruppak, laying down the models of governance that would continue long after the floodwaters receded. Rather than dismissing these wildly prolonged reigns as simple mythological exaggerations, analyzing the mathematical relationships between the recorded time periods reveals highly sophisticated astronomical calculations based on the Sumerian unit of the Sar, which equals 3,600 years. The sheer precision of these calculations suggests the King List preserved genuine chronological records by using measurement systems based entirely on astronomical cycles. The Sumerian King List, preserved in multiple copies including the Weld-Blundell prism at the Ashmolean Museum, lays out a systematic chronology of rulers from the descent of kingship from heaven through multiple dynasties. The antediluvian section lists 8 kings who ruled from 5 cities before the flood swept over the earth. The recorded reign lengths for these kings range from 18,600 years for Enmen-Luana of Bad Tibira to a staggering 43,200 years for Enmen-Galana of the same city. The total duration of antediluvian kingship comes out to 241,200 years. It's a number that seems impossibly vast if interpreted as conventional chronological time. But mathematical analysis of these huge numbers reveals that they are exact multiples of the Sar, a Sumerian unit equal to 3,600 years. The reign of Alulim, the first king of Eridu, lasted 8 Sars, or 28,800 years. Alangar, the second king of Eridu, ruled for 10 sars, or 36,000 years. This constant use of the sar unit throughout the antediluvian chronology proves that these massive numbers were calculated according to specific mathematical principles, rather than just invented out of thin air. The precision of these calculations tells us the King List employed sophisticated time measurement systems based on astronomical cycles. The SAR unit itself is tied to astronomical phenomena, most notably the precession of the equinoxes, which completes a full cycle roughly every 25,920 years. The Sumerian SAR of 3,600 years represents approximately 1/7 of the precessional cycle, creating hard mathematical relationships between royal chronology and cosmic time. This blending of the timescales of human governance with astronomical cycles shows that the antediluvian chronology was calculated according to celestial mechanics rather than earthly historical time. The astronomical bedrock of these calculations suggests the King List preserved the knowledge of long-term celestial cycles that are only observable through multi-generational observation programs. The 5 antediluvian cities listed in the King List correspond to real archaeological sites where excavations have revealed deep occupation during the Ubaid and Uruk periods. Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sipar, and Shurupak all contain deep stratigraphic sequences with occupation levels predating the flood layer identified across multiple sites. This archaeological confirmation of the cities mentioned in the mythological chronology proves that the King List wove together authentic historical and geographical information, rather than being purely fictional constructs. The combination of a mythological chronology with verified historical data suggests the list preserved complex knowledge systems that seamlessly integrated different types of information. The transition from antediluvian to post-diluvian kingship in the Sumerian King List marks a dramatic drop in the length of royal reigns. After the flood, kingship was established at Kish, where Jushur became king and ruled for 1,200 years. The subsequent post-diluvian reigns range from a few hundred to a few thousand years, a duration much shorter than the antediluvian periods, yet still far exceeding a normal human lifespan. This gradual reduction in reign lengths creates a chronological framework that bridges the gap from cosmic time through a heroic age into historical time. The systematic nature of this transition suggests highly intentional mathematical modeling rather than a random piling on of legends. The mathematical relationships between the different dynastic periods in the King List reveal sophisticated numerical patterns that go far beyond simple chronological record-keeping. The total duration of the first dynasty of Kish equals exactly 24,510 years. It's a figure mathematically tied to the antediluvian total by incredibly precise ratios. These mathematical relationships between the lengths of the dynasties suggest that the King List was composed according to comprehensive numerical schemes that encoded astronomical and historical information into fully integrated systems. The sheer complexity of these mathematical patterns indicates that compiling the King List required advanced calculation capabilities and systematic planning. The blending of mythological and historical material in the King List creates a chronological framework stretching from primordial creation all the way to contemporary dynasties. This exhaustive temporal sweep shows that the Sumerians viewed their history as a continuous, unbroken line from its cosmic origins to the present day, with no hard dividing line between mythological time and historical time. The seamless integration of different timescales and historical modes points to a highly sophisticated historiographical mindset regarding the relationship between cosmic, legendary, and historical events. The preservation of this integrated chronology across multiple copies and vast stretches of time proves its absolute importance to Sumerian cultural identity and institutional legitimacy. Mesopotamian tradition describes 7 primordial sages called the Apkallu, who appeared during the period before the flood to teach humanity the fundamental arts of civilization. These beings, deeply associated with the god Enki, were reputed to possess an exhaustive knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, building, and natural philosophy. Berosus, the Babylonian priest and historian, writing in the 3rd century BCE, describes the first Apkallu as an amphibious being named Oannes, who emerged from the Persian Gulf to instruct the first humans. The consistency of the Apkallu traditions across multiple sources and their association with highly specific technological achievements suggests they preserved the memories of a genuine transmission of knowledge, rather than being purely mythological constructs. The 7 Apkallu receive systematic documentation in Mesopotamian ritual texts, which identify each sage by name and link them to specific antediluvian cities and kings. The text, known as the Uruk list of kings and sages, preserved on tablet W 20,037 in the Iraq Museum, provides the most complete record of these primordial instructors. The list names Oannes, also called Adapa, as the very first Apkallu, having served under the reign of Alulim at Eridu. The second, the Apkallu Uanduga, appeared during the reign of Alongar, also at Eridu. The other 5 sages, Enmeduga, Enmegalama, Enmebuluga, An-Enlilda, and Utu Abzu, served the subsequent antediluvian rulers in various cities, including Bad Tibira, Larak, and Sippar. Berosus provides the most detailed physical description of the Apkallu in his Babyloniaca, written around 280 BCE. Though preserved only in fragments quoted by later Greek historians like Josephus and Eusebius. According to Berosus, the being called Oannes possessed a fish-like body combined with a human head beneath the fish's head, and human feet beneath the fish's tail. This dual nature allowed the creature to move seamlessly between aquatic and terrestrial environments. Emerging from the Persian Gulf during the daylight hours to instruct humans, it would return to the sea at night. The amphibious traits described by Berosus suggest a highly specialized adaptation for operating in the coastal environments where early Mesopotamian civilization first took root. The domains of knowledge attributed to the Apkallu encompass the complete spectrum of technologies required to establish a complex civilization. Berosus specifies that Oannes taught humans the foundations of writing, mathematics, and various sciences. The being instructed the first humans in urban planning and temple construction, in agricultural techniques, notably irrigation and grain cultivation, as well as in the legal principles needed to organize a society. The sheer exhaustiveness of this knowledge transfer, occurring in a single period of instruction, beautifully explains the sudden, explosive appearance of sophisticated urban civilization in southern Mesopotamia around 3,500 BCE, with no clear developmental stages in the archaeological record. Ritual texts from the Seleucid period preserved detailed descriptions of Apkallu figures that were placed in the foundations of temples as protective guardians. These ritual figurines, called mulilu, were fashioned from precious materials, including gold, silver, and lapis lazuli, and were inscribed with cuneiform texts identifying their protective functions. Archaeological excavations at several Mesopotamian sites have unearthed genuine Apkallu figurines that perfectly match the textual descriptions. These artifacts, typically measuring between 6 and 12 inches tall, represent human-fish hybrids that align exactly with the physical descriptions given by Berosus. The quality of the materials and the craftsmanship of the surviving examples prove the immense importance placed on Apkallu symbolism in Mesopotamian religious practice. The deep association between the Apkallu and the god Enki appears constantly in Mesopotamian literature, establishing these sages as servants or agents of the deity, responsible for humanity's well-being and technological advancement. The myth of Adapa, preserved in fragments on the Amarna tablets and in the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, describes the first Apkallu as possessing a wisdom comparable to Enki himself. The text states that Enki created Adapa as a model of humanity, granting him a comprehensive understanding, but deliberately denying him immortality. This narrative framework presents the Apkallu as prototypes or blueprints for optimal human development, beings who demonstrated the absolute full potential of human intellectual capabilities when properly educated. The technological achievements attributed specifically to each individual Apkallu reveal a highly systematic distribution of specialized knowledge domains among the 7 sages. Temple texts specify that Oannes invented writing and established the very first temples, while Uanduga developed agricultural techniques and irrigation systems. Enmegalama is credited with metallurgical innovations, specifically bronze working and tool making. This strict specialization suggests that the Apkallu tradition held on to the memories of multiple knowledge transmission events involving completely different technological fields, rather than attributing all civilizational knowledge to a single mythical source. The link between the Apkallu and fish symbolism extends far beyond physical appearance to encompass much deeper associations with water as the ultimate source of life and knowledge. The Sumerian and Akkadian term Abgal, from which Apkallu derives, translates literally to great beings of water or great beings of wisdom, creating hard linguistic ties between aquatic origins and sheer intellectual capability. This connection to knowledge appears throughout all Mesopotamian religious thought, particularly in association with Enki as the lord of the Abzu, the subterranean freshwater ocean, considered the wellspring of all wisdom. The consistency of this aquatic symbolism suggests that the early Mesopotamians firmly associated cultural and technological knowledge with sources coming from the Persian Gulf, or perhaps from somewhere beyond it. The sudden disappearance of the Apkallu after the Great Flood is treated explicitly in the texts describing how these primordial sages were blocked from continuing their direct instruction of humanity. The Epic of Era, dating to the 8th century BCE, but preserving much older traditions, describes how the Apkallu were sealed deep within the Abzu after the flood, preventing their return to the surface of the earth. This narrative explains the massive shift from direct divine instruction during the antediluvian period to a more indirect guidance through human intermediaries after the floodwaters receded. The confinement of the Apkallu created an absolute necessity for human priests and scholars to step up, preserving and transmitting the knowledge originally taught by the primordial sages. The post-Diluvian period saw the rise of a new class of sages, called the Umanu, human scholars, who inherited the educational role previously held by the Apkallu. These human sages, while lacking the supernatural traits of their predecessors, maintained the vital functions of knowledge transmission that were absolutely essential to the continuity of civilization. The Uruk list of kings and sages documents the direct succession from the Apkallu to the Umanu, creating an unbroken chain of wisdom transmission from the primordial period right down into historical times. This institutional continuity guaranteed that the knowledge originally taught by the Apkallu remained accessible to future generations through properly trained human scholars. Sumerian texts describe the laying of temple foundations during the primordial period, with deities themselves drawing up the floor plans of the sacred structures that would be maintained throughout history. The temple hymns hold on to references to these ancient foundations, describing how later temples were built directly upon or in perfect alignment with the primordial sacred sites. Archaeological excavations at major temple sites have revealed that the deepest construction levels incorporate architectural features and orientations that have been meticulously preserved through successive phases of rebuilding spanning thousands of years. This continuity suggests that the exact knowledge of primordial temple locations and proper construction techniques was carefully maintained through institutional memory. The temple hymns of Enheduanna, composed around 2300 BCE, but weaving in far older material, provide the most exhaustive documentation of these primordial temple foundations. These 42 hymns describe major temples across Sumer and Akkad, detailing their divine founders, their sacred functions, and their architectural features. Each hymn kicks off with references to the primordial establishment of the temple, using formulaic language that heavily emphasizes continuity with the original divine construction. The consistency of this primordial foundation motif across all 42 hymns proves that the Mesopotamians viewed their temples as holding unbreakable ties to sacred origins established at the very dawn of cosmic time. Archaeological research at the Ekkur temple complex in Nippur reveals hard physical evidence of the continuous reconstruction and preservation of these primordial foundations. Excavations led by the University of Pennsylvania between 1888 and 1900 unearthed 23 successive building levels on the temple site. The deepest levels date all the way back to around 5500 BCE. Analyzing the architectural alignments across these multiple phases of construction shows that every single reconstruction preserved the precise orientation of the earlier structures, with deviations of less than 1 degree. This extraordinary consistency over millennia of rebuilding points to a highly systematic preservation of architectural knowledge handed down through strict institutional procedures. The tradition of foundation deposits provides direct proof of the deliberate preservation of primordial temple knowledge. Mesopotamian builders systematically buried inscribed objects, precious materials, and figurines deep beneath temple foundations during construction ceremonies. These deposits served multiple purposes, including commemorating the construction, invoking divine protection, and preserving crucial information about the proper construction of the temple for future builders. Excavating foundation deposits at sites like Uruk and Lagash has recovered thousands of inscribed objects, documenting construction dates, royal sponsors, and exact architectural specifications. The endurance of this practice across the centuries is a testament to the institutional commitment to preserving construction knowledge. The architectural specifications preserved in these foundation inscriptions included precise measurements, material requirements, and orientation protocols that allowed for the wildly accurate reconstruction of damaged or decaying temples. The cylinders of Gudea. Monumental inscriptions created around 2100 BCE provide architectural information of exceptional precision regarding the Eninu temple at Lagash. These texts describe exactly how the god Ningirsu appeared to Gudea in a dream, handing over complete construction blueprints. The level of technical detail recorded in these inscriptions goes way beyond the typical needs of a simple commemoration, suggesting they functioned as literal construction manuals, saved for the future maintenance of the temple. The concept of divine architectural blueprints appears repeatedly in Mesopotamian temple building narratives, framing sacred construction as the execution of predetermined models rather than a human innovation. The myth of Enki and Ninhursag describes how the god Enki possessed the divine blueprints for all temples, keeping these plans safely stored in the Abzu, ready to be consulted whenever the construction or reconstruction of a temple became necessary. This narrative framework perfectly explains how architectural knowledge could be preserved across generations and through massive political upheavals by accessing eternal divine models maintained in a cosmic archive. The orientation of temples toward specific celestial phenomena created astronomical alignments that required highly specialized knowledge to establish and maintain. The main axis of the Ekkur temple in Nippur aligned perfectly with the sunrise on the summer solstice. It is an orientation that remained perfectly constant across multiple phases of reconstruction, spanning over 2,000 years. Maintaining this alignment demanded astronomical observation capabilities and surveying techniques capable of measuring angles with a precision of less than 1 degree. The successful preservation of these alignments through countless episodes of rebuilding proves that specialized astronomical knowledge was systematically passed down through priestly educational institutions. The proportional relationships governing temple architecture reveal incredibly sophisticated mathematical knowledge, encoded right into the dimensions of the buildings. Analyzing the floor plans of temples across multiple sites reveals the systematic use of specific ratios, notably 3, 5, and the square root of 2. These proportional systems appear in the very oldest temple structures and endure all the way to Neo-Babylonian constructions, indicating the flawless preservation of mathematical principles over millennia. The consistency of these proportions suggests they stem from standardized architectural canons that dictated the exact proper relationships between different building elements. The ziggurat represents the most elaborate development of primordial temple foundation concepts, creating artificial mountains that physically embodied cosmic connections. The ziggurat of built around 2100 BCE, incorporated 7 distinct levels, representing the steps between earth and heaven. Foundation inscriptions describe how the structure was erected upon the platform of the ancient gods, heavily emphasizing continuity with the primordial foundations established during cosmic creation. The massive scale of ziggurat construction and the staggering resources dedicated to their upkeep demonstrate the central importance of temple architecture in Mesopotamian religious and political systems. Preserving temple construction knowledge through scribal schools ensured that architectural principles were safely handed down across generations of builders and priests. The curriculum texts from Old Babylonian scribal schools include mathematical problems directly related to temple construction, training students in the exact calculations needed to properly design these buildings. These teaching materials prove that architectural knowledge was formalized into a highly teachable system, rather than just remaining the exclusive secret of a few master craftsmen. Integrating architectural education into scribal training created institutional mechanisms that preserved construction knowledge entirely independent of any individual artisan. Mesopotamian cosmology identifies specific mountains as the primordial connection points between heaven and earth, established during the initial cosmic organization. The ziggurat, which literally translates to mountain house, represented an artificial replica of these sacred peaks, allowing communication between the divine and human realms. Sumerian texts describe how these sacred mountains were established during the massive separation of heaven and earth, serving as the pillars that maintained the proper cosmic structure. Archaeological evidence reveals that ziggurat construction integrated highly sophisticated astronomical alignments and geometric proportions that perfectly replicated the mathematical principles associated with the sacred mountain symbolism. The concept of the sacred mountain as a cosmic axis appears in the earliest Sumerian cosmological texts, describing specific peaks as the points where heaven and earth remained connected long after their primordial separation. The hymn to Enlil identifies Mount Ekur as the cosmic mountain where the god established his earthly dwelling, forging a permanent communication link between the celestial and terrestrial domains. This cosmic mountain served as the axis mundi, the central pillar around which the ordered cosmos revolved. It maintained the proper separation between the upper and lower realms, while still allowing for controlled interaction between them. The Atemenonki Ziggurat in Babylon, identified by some scholars as the historical basis for the biblical Tower of Babel, illustrates the concept of the artificial sacred mountain in its most fully developed form. Foundation inscriptions describe the structure as the house of the foundation platform of heaven and earth, explicitly identifying it as a cosmic connection point. The 7 levels of the ziggurat, each painted a different color and dedicated to a different planet, created a physical representation of the cosmic structure that visitors could actually climb, experiencing the progression from earthly to celestial realms. The dimensions of the structure, recorded in multiple cuneiform texts, specify a square base measuring roughly 300 feet on each side, with a height of about 300 feet, creating a perfect cubic form that embodied cosmic perfection and completeness. Archaeological research into ziggurat construction reveals highly sophisticated engineering knowledge applied to creating massive, incredibly stable structures on soft, alluvial soils. Ziggurat construction typically employed sun-dried mud bricks for the core, with the exterior faces protected by an envelope of baked bricks about 6 feet thick. These baked brick layers were set with bitumen mortar, which provided waterproof protection against seasonal rains and groundwater infiltration. The engineering calculations required to prevent the subsidence and structural failure of these massive buildings demonstrate an advanced grasp of load distribution, materials properties, and foundation design. The successful survival of ziggurat cores through millennia of total abandonment confirms just how fiercely effective these ancient Mesopotamian engineering principles truly were. The astronomical alignments baked into ziggurat design created fully functional observatories that allowed for incredibly precise celestial measurements. The ziggurat incorporated sight lines perfectly oriented toward the sunrise on the summer solstice, when observed from specific positions on the structure. These alignments allowed the priests to determine the exact date of the solstice, a piece of information absolutely crucial for maintaining accurate calendar systems. The integration of astronomical observation capabilities into temple architecture proves that ziggurats served highly practical scientific functions alongside their religious and symbolic roles. The mathematical proportions dictating ziggurat design encode the deep relationships between different cosmic domains and astronomical cycles. Analyzing ziggurat dimensions reveals the constant use of ratios derived from astronomical periods, including the lunar month, the solar year, and much longer cycles, like the 18.6-year lunar standstill period. The ziggurat at Uruk incorporated dimensions encoding the exact ratio between lunar and solar years, with horizontal measurements representing solar cycles, and vertical dimensions perfectly corresponding to lunar periods. These mathematical encodings essentially transformed the ziggurat into a three-dimensional astronomical calculator that physically embodied cosmic temporal relationships. The characteristic stepped profile of ziggurat architecture created multiple levels representing distinct stages in the cosmic hierarchy. The ascent from ground level to the summit platform symbolized the journey from the earthly realm to the divine. Each level represented a specific celestial sphere. Ritual processions climbing the ziggurats were literally reenacting cosmic journeys, allowing participants to physically experience the transition between different levels of reality. The sheer physical effort required to climb the ziggurat stairs created a bodily experience that reinforced the theological concepts regarding just how difficult it was to approach the divine presence. The summit temples crowning the ziggurat platform served as the actual literal dwellings for the deities during their earthly manifestations. These temples, usually small single-room structures, were fully furnished with beds, tables, and offering equipment for divine use. Temple staff maintained these summit sanctuaries through daily rituals that provided food, drink, and other absolute necessities to the resident deities. These highly practical arrangements for divine comfort suggest the Mesopotamians understood the presence of the deity as involving a very real physical manifestation that required material support, rather than just a purely spiritual existence. Orienting the corners of the ziggurat toward the cardinal directions, rather than aligning the sides with them, represents a highly deliberate architectural choice with deep astronomical significance. This corner orientation creates the absolute optimal positions for observing the rising and setting of the sun at the equinoxes and solstices. When these events occur at points exactly 45 degrees from the cardinal directions, the consistent use of this orientation model across multiple ziggurats demonstrates a shared astronomical knowledge and highly coordinated architectural planning between completely different Mesopotamian cities. The symbolic identification of ziggurats with cosmic mountains extended right to their names, which explicitly reference the concepts of mountains and foundations. The ziggurat of Nippur bore the name Ekur, meaning mountain house, while the structure in Babylon was called Etemenanki, meaning house of the foundation platform of heaven and earth. These names perfectly summarize the theological concepts of ziggurats as the architectural embodiment of the cosmic structure, simultaneously representing earthly mountains, celestial platforms, and the bedrock foundation supporting the entire universal order. The Epic of Atrahasis provides deeply detailed descriptions of the creation of humanity, presenting it not as a single magical act, but as a highly systematic process involving multiple attempts and refinements. The text describes how the gods created early human prototypes that proved to be highly unsatisfactory, before finally hitting upon the desired combination of physical and intellectual capabilities. These creation accounts include incredibly specific details on the materials used, the procedures followed, and the exact problems encountered during the initial attempts. The sheer precision of these details, including references to genetic material and gestation periods, suggests the text is preserving technical knowledge about biological processes rather than just spinning simple creation myths. The Epic of Atrahasis, preserved in multiple versions from the Old Babylonian period all the way to the Neo-Assyrian era, frames human creation as a direct solution to a massive labor shortage faced by the subordinate gods, known as the Igigi. The text describes how these minor deities, tasked with the back-breaking work of agriculture and irrigation maintenance, rebelled against their assigned duties because the workload was simply too crushing. The great gods, confronted with this sudden labor crisis, decided to create replacement workers who could shoulder these heavy burdens, freeing up the divine beings for more appropriate activities. This deeply practical motivation for human creation frames the entire process as the resolution of a technological problem, rather than an abstract theological expression. The creation procedure described in the Epic of Atrahasis involves mixing clay with the blood of a sacrificed god, specifically the deity Awilu or Ilawela, who is explicitly described as possessing intelligence. The goddess Nintu, working under Enki's close supervision, combines these materials in highly specific proportions to create a mixture that will yield living humans. The text provides precise procedural details, stipulating that the divine blood had to be mixed with the clay in the presence of the assembled gods. The mixture had to be thoroughly kneaded to ensure complete integration. This intense focus on proper mixing technique and material proportions echoes our modern biological understanding of how genetic material requires proper integration into cellular matrices. The gestation process is given a meticulous description in the text, specifying that the clay-blood mixture was divided into 14 pieces, 7 designated for males and 7 for females. Each portion was implanted into the wombs of 14 goddesses who served as surrogate mothers for the first humans. The text specifies a gestation period of 10 months, notably longer than a typical human pregnancy, suggesting either a different temporal measurement or a deliberately prolonged development phase for these human prototypes. The systematic approach to reproduction, using multiple simultaneous gestations to produce a viable population, shows a deep understanding of the biological requirements needed to establish sustainable breeding groups. The early human prototypes produced by this process proved to be deeply flawed, according to the text, exhibiting various physical and behavioral problems that demanded further refinement. One of the early versions couldn't hold down food, another couldn't control its bodily functions, and a third completely lacked the ability to reproduce. These failed prototypes are given detailed descriptions that read almost like clinical case reports, documenting the specific deficiencies and their direct impacts on the organism's viability. The systematic documentation of these failures and the subsequent corrections demonstrates a highly experimental approach to human creation, one involving iterative refinement based entirely on observed results. The corrections applied to the early human prototypes involved tweaking the mixture ratios and modifying the gestation procedures. The text describes how Enki altered the proportion of divine blood to clay, cranking up the intellectual component while carefully maintaining the necessary physical strength. Further tweaks involved changes to the incubation environment and postnatal development procedures. The technical nature of these adjustments, described with a precision highly unusual for mythological texts, suggests the preservation of genuine biological knowledge regarding the factors that affect human development. The final successful human design integrated specific traits that perfectly balanced the divine desire for capable workers with hard limits, ensuring humans could never rival the gods. The text makes it clear that humans were granted just enough intelligence to understand instructions and perform complex tasks, but not enough wisdom to ever threaten divine authority. Physical strength was carefully calibrated to allow for heavy labor, while remaining vastly inferior to divine capabilities. Reproductive capacity was meticulously controlled to allow for population replacement without triggering explosive growth. Growth that would simply recreate the initial problem of overpopulation and noise that had provoked divine interventions in the first place. The concept of humans as blended beings, combining divine essence through the god's blood and earthly matter through the clay, receives a deep theological elaboration in Mesopotamian literature. This dual nature perfectly explains the human capacity for both transcendent thought and base behavior, for high intellectual achievement and hard physical limitation. The blending paradigm gave the Mesopotamians a framework to understand human potential and its constraints, explaining capabilities that far exceeded those of animals, while acknowledging the hard limits that prevented equality with the gods. Preserving creation knowledge through ritual reenactment ensured these narratives were passed down through the generations. The Babylonian New Year festival included ceremonial recitations of the Epic of Atrahasis. Priests performed ritual gestures, physically representing the mixing of clay and blood. These dramatic presentations transformed abstract theological concepts into deeply embodied experiences, reinforcing the cultural memory of human origins. The ritual preservation of creation narratives proves their absolute importance to Mesopotamian cultural identity and religious understanding. Sumerian cosmological texts describe exactly how the primordial deities divided cosmic responsibilities among themselves, according to highly specific protocols and hierarchies. Anu received sovereignty over the heavens. Enlil governed the atmosphere and the earth, while Enki controlled the subterranean waters. This division represented far more than just a territorial carve-up. It established operational jurisdictions that determined exactly which deity would oversee specific natural phenomena and technological domains. Administrative tablets from the temple archives reveal elaborate protocols for invoking different deities based precisely on their assigned cosmic responsibilities, suggesting these jurisdictional divisions were understood as functional realities rather than just mythological constructs. The cosmic division appears systematically documented in the text known as the Babylonian Theodicy, a wisdom composition preserved on tablets from the Kassite period. This text describes how Anu, Enlil, and Enki actually drew lots to determine their respective domains. Anu received the heavens. Enlil took the earth and atmosphere, and Enki was given the subterranean waters. Using a lottery as the allocation mechanism frames the cosmic division as a strictly impartial procedure following established protocols, rather than an arbitrary power grab. This procedural focus beautifully reflects Mesopotamian cultural values regarding proper governance. Governance achieved through institutional mechanisms rather than personal authority. The celestial domain assigned to Anu encompassed not just the physical sky, but abstract concepts of supreme authority and cosmic law. Anu's position as the sky god granted him absolute sovereignty over the highest heavens, where the great gods gathered in council to make massive cosmic decisions. Temple texts describe Anu's palace as the place where destinies were determined and fundamental laws were laid down. This tight association between the celestial realm and supreme legislative authority created the cosmological bedrock for earthly governance structures, where kings drew their legitimacy directly from a celestial mandate. Enlil's governance over the atmosphere and the Earth's surface granted him authority over meteorological phenomena, agricultural productivity, and human political structures. The hymns to Enlil describe his absolute control over the winds, storms, and rainfall that dictated the success or failure of agriculture. The god's jurisdiction extended to the appointment of earthly kings and the establishment of the governmental institutions that maintained social order. This potent combination of meteorological and political authority made him the most powerful deity in practice, despite Anu's theoretical supremacy. The blending of natural and political governance under a single divine authority perfectly reflects the Mesopotamian understanding of the deep interconnections between environmental conditions and social stability. Enki's control of the subterranean waters granted him authority over the water table, the rivers, and the irrigation systems that were the absolute lifeblood of Mesopotamian agriculture. The god's domain encompassed not just physical water, but the wisdom and knowledge metaphorically associated with vital fluids. Temple texts describe Enki as the lord of the Abzu, the master of all crafts, and the patron of technology and innovation. This tight association between water management and intellectual activity perfectly reflects the practical realities of Mesopotamian civilization, where hydraulic management demanded highly sophisticated engineering knowledge and serious mathematical calculation capabilities. The division of cosmic responsibilities extended far beyond the main triad to include secondary deities who governed highly specific natural phenomena and technological domains. Shamash received authority over solar phenomena and justice, forging deep links between celestial regularity and legal order. Sin governed the lunar cycles and calendar calculations, laying the foundation for time measurement systems. Ishtar controlled the dual aspects of warfare and sexuality domains, linked by the raw concepts of productive and destructive power. This systematic distribution of responsibilities created an exhaustive divine administration encompassing absolutely every aspect of natural and social existence. Administrative texts from the temple archives document the highly practical applications of these divine jurisdictional divisions through protocols dictating how prayers and offerings should be directed to the appropriate deities. These ritual texts specify exactly which gods must be invoked for particular requests, creating a deeply bureaucratic procedure for accessing divine assistance. Prayers for rain were routed to Enlil, requests for successful irrigation went to Enki, and petitions regarding legal disputes were filed with Shamash. This highly systematic approach to divine communication reflects an understanding of cosmic governance as something operating through specialized administrative channels, rather than through a generalized, hazy divine power. The territorial aspects of divine jurisdiction extended to specific geographical regions assigned to different deities. Anu's earthly cult center at Uruk represented his administration point on Earth, while Enlil's temple at Nippur served as the terrestrial equivalent to his atmospheric authority. Enki's primary cult site at Eridu, right near the Persian Gulf, offered the perfect coastal location for the god associated with fresh water and maritime wisdom. This geographical distribution of divine cult centers created a literal spatial representation of the cosmic administrative structure. Different cities served as earthly headquarters for completely different aspects of divine governance. The mathematical precision underlying these cosmic divisions appears in texts that assigned highly specific numerical values to different deities based on their hierarchical position and functional domain. Anu received the number 60, representing his supreme position as head of the pantheon. Enlil's number 50 indicated his secondary but practically dominant role. Enki's number 40 reflected his position as third in the main divine triad. These divine numbers functioned as literal computational codes used in astronomical calculations, ritual procedures, and administrative accounting systems, proving the absolute integration of theological concepts into highly practical mathematical operations. Sumerian mathematical texts reveal that specific numbers were considered sacred simply because of their association with primordial cosmic organization. The number 60, the absolute bedrock of the Sumerian numerical system, appears constantly in astronomical calculations, architectural proportions, and chronological measurements. The number 7 receives heavy emphasis in relation to primordial cosmic structure, including the 7 heavens, the 7 earths, and the 7 primordial sages. Analyzing these sacred number systems reveals highly sophisticated mathematical relationships that seamlessly integrate astronomical cycles, geometric principles, and natural harmonics. It suggests they derived from the systematic study of cosmic patterns, rather than just arbitrary religious symbolism. The base 60 numerical system employed across all Mesopotamian mathematics and astronomy represents one of the most significant intellectual achievements in human history, creating computational frameworks we still use today to measure time and angles. The sexagesimal structure of the system divides the circle into 360 degrees. Each degree is divided into 60 minutes, and each minute into 60 seconds, creating hierarchical divisions that allow for incredibly precise astronomical calculations. The choice of 60 as a base number reflects its exceptional divisibility. It possesses 12 factors, including 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, and 30. This massive divisibility makes the number absolutely ideal for fractional calculations involving common divisions, offering a computational efficiency unmatched by decimal systems. Mathematical tablets from the Old Babylonian period showcase highly sophisticated applications of sexagesimal notation in astronomical calculations that demanded the manipulation of huge numbers and complex fractions. The Plimpton 322 tablet, housed at Columbia University, contains trigonometric calculations using Pythagorean triples that prove a deep understanding of mathematical relationships centuries before Greek mathematicians supposedly discovered these principles. The tablet's calculations use sexagesimal fractions, with a precision extending to multiple decimal places, indicating that Mesopotamian mathematicians possessed calculation techniques fully comparable to modern numerical analysis. The sacred significance of 60 extends far beyond its practical computational advantages to encompass a deep cosmological symbolism, seamlessly connecting earthly mathematics to celestial mechanics. The number 60 corresponds to the divine number of Anu, establishing the supreme sky god as the ultimate patron of the numerical system itself. This hard association between the highest deity and the fundamental mathematical base creates the theological foundation for numerical practice, framing mathematics as a divine gift rather than a human invention. Temple texts describe exactly how Anu established base 60 during primordial cosmic organization, laying down the mathematical frameworks that would govern every single calculation to follow. The number 7 receives a massive amount of elaboration in Sumerian cosmological texts as a fundamental organizing principle, structuring multiple aspects of the cosmic order. The 7 heavens, the 7 earths, and the 7 primordial sages appear in recurring patterns that suggest the number 7 held a highly specific significance in Mesopotamian mathematical and religious thought. The prevalence of 7 in cosmic structures spills right over into ritual practices, including 7-day ceremonial cycles, the 7 gates of the underworld, and the 7-stringed musical instruments used in temple ceremonies. This systematic application of 7 across completely diverse domains shows it functioned as a hard organizing principle rather than just coincidental repetition. The mathematical relationship between 7 and astronomical cycles provides the rational bedrock for the number's sacred status. The lunar month of roughly 29.5 days naturally divides into 4 weeks of 7 days, creating a 7-day cycle that perfectly syncs up with visible lunar phases. The 7 visible celestial bodies known to ancient astronomers, the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, granted even more significance to the number 7 as the ultimate representation of completeness in celestial observation. The tight correlation between 7-day weeks, lunar phases, and the number of planets proves that sacred numbers derived from systematic astronomical observation rather than arbitrary, mystical speculation. The number 12 appears across all Mesopotamian mathematics and cosmology as yet another fundamental organizing principle, dividing the year into 12 months, the day into 12 double hours, and the zodiac into 12 constellations. The relationship between 12 and 60 creates beautifully nested cycles where 5 periods of 12 units equal 1 cycle of 60 units, establishing mathematical harmonies that made complex calculations significantly easier. Dividing the zodiac by 12 allowed for the highly precise tracking of the sun's position throughout the annual cycle, laying the bedrock for astrological systems that would deeply influence Mediterranean and Near Eastern cultures for millennia. The number 3,600, calculated as 60 squared, received a highly specific designation in Sumerian mathematics, known as the sar, a unit employed to measure massive periods of cosmic time and vast spatial distances. The Sumerian King List uses sar units to measure the lengths of antediluvian reigns, creating chronologies that stretch across hundreds of thousands of years when translated into conventional time units. This specific use of the SAR to measure primordial time suggests the Sumerians recognized multiple timescales, understanding that cosmic time operated on totally different parameters than human historical time. The mathematical precision of SAR-based chronologies points to a highly sophisticated understanding of nested temporal cycles, operating at vastly different scales. Integrating sacred numbers into architectural proportions created buildings that physically embodied mathematical principles considered absolutely fundamental to cosmic order. Temple floor plans systematically employ proportional relationships based on sacred numbers, with dimensions frequently expressing ratios derived from 7, 12, and 60. The Ekur temple in Nippur integrated sacred number measurements into both its horizontal and vertical dimensions, creating three-dimensional mathematical relationships that transformed the building into a literal, physical representation of cosmic numerical order. This architectural encoding of sacred mathematics proves that Mesopotamian builders viewed their constructions as the physical materialization of abstract mathematical principles. The musical applications of sacred numbers appear in texts detailing the mathematics of harmonic intervals and the construction of musical instruments. The standard seven-stringed lyre, the absolute workhorse of Mesopotamian temple music, created intervals based on mathematical ratios that generated perfectly consonant harmonies. Temple musicians used precise numerical relationships between string lengths to produce highly specific pitches, applying heavy mathematical knowledge to create acoustic effects deemed appropriate for divine worship. The integration of mathematical principles into musical practice demonstrates the Mesopotamian recognition of the deep links between numerical relationships and aesthetic experience. Sumerian texts contain fascinating references to a primordial language spoken long before the confusion of tongues, described as the exact language the gods used to establish cosmic order through the sheer power of naming and decree. The Sumerian language itself was considered deeply sacred because of its association with this primordial speech. Linguistic analysis reveals that Sumerian exhibits highly unusual characteristics for a natural language, most notably an agglutinative structure and a highly precise technical vocabulary for advanced concepts in mathematics, astronomy, and engineering. These linguistic quirks strongly suggest that Sumerian might have been deliberately constructed or refined for technical communication, rather than just naturally evolving through gradual cultural development. The concept of a primordial divine language pops up in the myth of Enki and the world order, where the god organizes the cosmic domains through the sheer power of an authoritative word. The text describes how Enki traveled across the known world, issuing decrees that established the proper functions for every region, river, and natural element. These verbal declarations literally created reality through naming. The spoken words possessed a creative power that yanked order straight out of chaos. This linguistic cosmology frames language not as an arbitrary set of conventions used to label a pre-existing reality, but as a deeply constitutive force that actively generates reality through proper naming and description. The agglutinative structure of the Sumerian language, building complex words by systematically combining discrete morphemes, creates an exceptional level of precision when expressing technical and abstract concepts. A single Sumerian word can pack in multiple grammatical and semantic elements, including the subject, object, verb tense, and modifiers, producing incredibly compact expressions that convey information requiring multiple words in inflected languages. This structural efficiency makes Sumerian uniquely, perfectly suited for technical documentation, where precision and conciseness are everything. The language's ability to forge new compound words through the systematic combination of morphemes allows for the expression of totally novel concepts without needing to expand the vocabulary through borrowing or innovation. The technical vocabulary preserved in Sumerian mathematical and astronomical texts showcases an unexpected sophistication in a language supposedly so ancient and primitive. Terms for advanced mathematical concepts, including zero place value notation, sexagesimal fractions, and geometric transformations, appear in the very oldest mathematical texts, without a single shred of evidence showing a gradual terminological development. The astronomical vocabulary includes highly precise terms for stellar positions, planetary movements, eclipse phenomena, and calendar calculations, pointing to a deeply profound technical understanding. This highly advanced technical terminology, appearing fully formed in the oldest texts, suggests either a remarkably rapid linguistic development or the inheritance of a terminology from much older sources. The relationship between Sumerian and the other ancient languages of the Near East presents massive puzzles that severely complicate conventional theories of linguistic evolution. Sumerian shows absolutely no clear genetic relationship to Semitic Indo-European or any other known language families, standing completely alone as a linguistic isolate with no identified relatives. This stark isolation raises massive questions about the true origins of Sumerian and its relationship to the other languages spoken in ancient Mesopotamia. The grammatical structure and phonological system of the language differ fundamentally from those of the surrounding Semitic languages, suggesting either an extreme antiquity that predates linguistic diversification or an introduction from totally external sources. The preservation of Sumerian as a scholarly and liturgical language long after it ceased being spoken natively proves its deeply sacred status within Mesopotamian civilization. The Akkadian-speaking Babylonians and Assyrians continued to use Sumerian for religious texts, scholarly compositions, and official inscriptions right through the 2nd and 1st millennia BCE. They treated it as a classical language, much like Latin in medieval Europe. This highly conscious preservation of a dead language for sacred and scholarly purposes tells us that Sumerian was valued not just as cultural heritage, but as an exceptionally perfect medium for expressing religious and technical knowledge. Bilingual lexical texts document the massive systematic efforts to preserve Sumerian linguistic knowledge through translation into Akkadian. These lexical lists, packing thousands of entries, organized by semantic category, functioned as dictionaries, allowing Akkadian speakers to read and compose texts in Sumerian. The sheer exhaustiveness of these lexical compilations and the extreme care put into their production prove the massive institutional commitment to preserving the knowledge of the Sumerian language. The very existence of this educational material indicates that literacy in Sumerian was considered absolutely essential for the educated elite long after the language had died out as a mother tongue. The magical power attributed to Sumerian words in later Mesopotamian ritual texts reflects deep beliefs regarding the language's special connection to primordial creative forces. Incantations and magical formulas preserved in Akkadian texts frequently include Sumerian words or phrases considered exceptionally effective because of their tight association with divine speech. These ritual uses of Sumerian vocabulary treated the ancient language as possessing an inherent power that went far beyond its semantic meaning. The absolute proper pronunciation of Sumerian formulas was considered vital to their magical effectiveness. This ritualization of Sumerian linguistic elements showcases the deep cultural beliefs regarding the sacred nature of the language and its unbroken connection to divine creative powers. The standardization of Sumerian orthography and grammar through training in the scribal schools created an incredible linguistic consistency across vast geographic areas and massive stretches of time. Student tablets from scribal schools all across Mesopotamia display the exact same grammatical paradigms and identical lexical lists. This points to the development of a highly centralized curriculum and standardized teaching methods. This educational standardization ensured that Sumerian literacy remained perfectly consistent, despite the glaring fact that the language no longer had native speakers to drive its natural linguistic evolution. The successful preservation of these linguistic standards through institutional teaching demonstrates a highly sophisticated understanding of exactly what it takes to maintain a language. Sumerian astronomical texts describe the organization of stars into constellations as something that happened during the primordial period, right when the cosmic order was first established. The Mulapin Compendium preserves deeply detailed star catalogs that divide the sky into 3 distinct paths, associated with Anu, Enlil, and Enki. This creates a highly systematic framework for astronomical observation. The precision of the stellar positions recorded in these texts and the sophistication of the mathematical calculations used to predict celestial events indicate access to highly advanced astronomical knowledge right from the earliest periods. The staggering consistency of Sumerian constellation systems with the astronomical traditions found in Egypt, India, and other ancient civilizations suggests they all derived from common primordial sources. The Mulapin text, taking its name from its opening words, meaning the constellation of the plow star, represents the most comprehensive astronomical compendium surviving from ancient Mesopotamia. The composition, preserved on tablets dating to the Neo-Assyrian period, but obviously based on much older observations, contains highly detailed star catalogs, organized by the 3-path celestial division. The text lists 33 constellations on the path of Enlil, 23 on the path of Anu, and 15 on the path of Enki, creating an exhaustive map of the visible sky. Each constellation gets a full description, including its exact position, its associated deities, and its importance for calendar calculation and omen interpretation. The 3-path division of the celestial sphere actually corresponds to zones of declination, rather than just some arbitrary theological categorization. The path of Enlil encompasses the stars located north of a declination of about 15 degrees, which corresponds perfectly to the northern celestial hemisphere visible from Mesopotamian latitudes. The path of Anu covers the central celestial band between plus 15 degrees and minus 15 degrees of declination, roughly corresponding to the ecliptic zone where the sun, moon, and planets appear. The path of Enki includes the southern stars located below -15 degrees of declination, representing the southern celestial hemisphere. This organization, based entirely on declination, proves that the classification of constellations followed hard, systematic astronomical principles rather than religious symbolism. The stellar positional data preserved in the MUL APIN showcases a remarkable observational precision for naked-eye astronomy. The text records the rising times of different constellations throughout the entire year, providing the exact data needed for calendar synchronization and seasonal forecasting. The sheer accuracy of these rising time calculations points to massive, systematic observation programs conducted over long periods to establish average values that accounted for annual variations. The mathematical techniques used to convert these observed rising times into hard calendar dates demonstrate a highly sophisticated grasp of the relationship between sidereal time and solar time. The system of zodiacal constellations that would later dominate both Mesopotamian and Mediterranean astronomy emerges in a highly developed form right in the MUL APIN and its related texts. The 12 zodiacal constellations, corresponding perfectly to the 12 months of the solar year, created a systematic framework for tracking solar position and calculating planetary movements. The strict mathematical division of the ecliptic into 12 equal 30-degree segments allowed for incredibly precise angular measurements and made complex astronomical calculations significantly easier. This highly standardized zodiacal system appears fully formed in the oldest astronomical texts, with absolutely zero evidence of gradual development. This strongly suggests an inheritance from much older sources, or the incredibly rapid systematic organization of pre-existing observational data. The glaring consistency between Mesopotamian constellation traditions and those found in Egyptian, Indian, and Greek astronomical systems raises massive questions about possible common origins or a direct transmission of knowledge. Several constellations appear with nearly identical shapes and names across these wildly different cultures, despite massive geographical separation and an apparent lack of direct contact during their formative periods. The constellation we recognize as the Bull, Taurus, appears in Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Indian sources with almost identical stellar associations. The 7 stars forming the Pleiades are recognized and named in cultures all over the globe, suggesting either an innate human recognition of universal patterns or a direct transmission from a shared common source. The use of constellations to regulate the calendar proves their immense practical importance, far beyond any religious or mythological meaning. The heliacal rising of specific stars, when they first become visible just before sunrise, after long periods of invisibility, provided highly reliable calendar markers that allowed for precise agricultural planning and the strict scheduling of rituals. The MUL.APIN contains vast tables correlating stellar rising times with exact calendar dates, creating fully functional calendars grounded entirely in astronomical observation. The precision of these calendar calculations and their incredibly successful application over centuries proves that constellation systems served absolutely essential practical functions in organizing temporal cycles. The association of specific deities with particular constellations created deep theological frameworks for understanding celestial phenomena as divine activities. The constellation of Orion was identified with the god Ninurta, the Pleiades, with the 7 divine judges of the underworld, and various other star groups with different deities. These divine associations transformed abstract stellar patterns into massive narrative frameworks linking celestial and earthly events. The highly systematic nature of these deity constellation matchups suggests a deeply deliberate organization rather than random, arbitrary assignment. The mathematical techniques used to calculate planetary positions relative to the zodiacal constellations demonstrate a highly advanced understanding of celestial mechanics. Babylonian astronomical texts from the Seleucid period contain incredibly complex mathematical procedures for predicting planetary locations using sophisticated computational algorithms. These procedures utilize iterative calculations, numerical interpolation, and other advanced mathematical techniques that allow for highly accurate, long-term predictions. The sheer sophistication of these calculation methods points to a development built on long periods of highly systematic astronomical observation and brutal mathematical analysis. Sumerian ritual texts describe incredibly elaborate sacrificial protocols that were established right in the primordial period as the only appropriate method of communication between the human and divine realms. These protocols specify the exact materials, the precise timing, and the rigorous procedures required for different types of offerings, with a level of precision that strongly suggests hard technical requirements rather than arbitrary religious preferences. The administrative records of the temples document a meticulous adherence to these ancient protocols over millennia, proving they were understood as absolutely essential procedures rather than optional traditions. Chemical analysis of residues found in ancient temple vessels reveals that the ritual recipes incorporated highly specific compounds and proportions that perfectly match the textual descriptions. This confirms the absolute technical precision of the preserved sacrificial knowledge. The concept of sacrifice as a literal communication technology between the human and divine realms permeates Mesopotamian religious thought, framing offerings not as gifts to appease angry deities, but as technical procedures for establishing and maintaining proper relationships. Temple texts describe these sacrificial procedures using terminology ripped straight from administrative and technological domains, rather than using a purely religious vocabulary. The language used to describe sacrifice perfectly parallels the language used to describe irrigation technology, building construction, and other highly technical procedures, suggesting the Mesopotamians understood ritual as applied technology rather than symbolic religious practice. The materials specified for different types of sacrifices show a highly systematic understanding of the chemical and physical properties relevant to the ritual's effectiveness. Incense offerings required highly specific aromatic resins, including frankincense, myrrh, and cedar materials, selected purely for their combustion characteristics and aromatic properties. Libation offerings specified very particular liquids, notably beer, wine, milk, and honey, each deemed appropriate for entirely different ritual contexts and divine recipients. Animal sacrifices designated incredibly specific species, ages, and physical traits for different ceremonies, creating massive, comprehensive systems of sacrificial taxonomy. The sheer precision of these material specifications points to a deep technical understanding of exactly how different substances behaved in ritual contexts. The administrative archives of the temples hold incredibly detailed records documenting the exact consumption of sacrificial materials, confirming the textual descriptions of these rigorous ritual requirements. Economic texts from the Third Dynasty of Ur dating to around 2000 BCE, record the daily expenditures for temple sacrifices, including the precise quantities of grain, beer animals, and other offerings. These administrative records perfectly match the specifications found in the ritual texts, proving that the prescribed sacrificial protocols were actually implemented in reality, rather than just representing some idealized procedure ignored in practice. The deep consistency between the ritual prescriptions and the administrative records confirms that these sacrificial systems operated according to strict, documented standards, maintained over incredibly long periods. Chemical analysis of the residues inside ancient temple vessels provides hard material proof, confirming the absolute accuracy of the textual descriptions of these sacrificial recipes. Analysis conducted on pottery fragments from the temples of Ur and Uruk has identified organic residues, including plant alkaloids, mineral compounds, and animal products that perfectly match the exact ingredients specified in the pharmaceutical recipes. The chemical signatures of these residues point to highly specific preparation methods, notably controlled heating, fermentation, and combination in very particular sequences. The tight correlation between the chemical evidence and the textual descriptions completely validates the technical accuracy of the preserved ritual knowledge. The temporal synchronization protocols for sacrificial rituals demonstrate a deep integration with astronomical cycles and calendar systems. The ritual texts specify the absolute optimal moments for different offerings based on lunar phases, stellar positions, and seasonal markers. Daily sacrifices took place at highly precise hours, coordinated with solar movements, while monthly ceremonies aligned perfectly with observations of the new moon. Annual festivals demanded heavily scheduled sacrifices during solstices, equinoxes, and the heliacal risings of stars. This intense astronomical synchronization created sacrificial calendars that perfectly aligned religious activities with celestial cycles, guaranteeing that ritual communications occurred only when cosmic conditions were absolutely optimal. The sequences of procedures prescribed for complex sacrificial rituals demonstrate a profound understanding of process management and quality control. Ritual texts describe multi-step procedures requiring highly specific actions executed in a rigidly prescribed order, complete with quality control checkpoints, ensuring proper execution. Purification procedures had to precede sacrificial activities, followed by the preparation of materials, the presentation of the offering, and the disposal of the remains, according to strict, specified protocols. The highly systematic nature of these procedural sequences finds perfect parallels in modern manufacturing processes, with their heavy emphasis on standardized procedures and rigorous quality verification. Integrating sacrificial facilities directly into temple architectural design created a permanent infrastructure supporting these ritual activities. Temple complexes incorporated highly specialized zones for animal slaughter cooking facilities to prepare food offerings, and dedicated storage areas for ritual materials. Archaeological excavations of these facilities reveal highly sophisticated infrastructure, notably advanced drainage systems for blood disposal, ovens designed for highly specific cooking requirements, and storage magazines with environmental controls to preserve perishable materials. The massive investment in specialized ritual infrastructure proves the absolutely central importance of sacrificial systems in the day-to-day operation of the temples. Preserving sacrificial knowledge through intense priestly training programs guaranteed the unbroken continuity of ritual practices across generations. The curriculum texts of the scribal schools included rigorous instruction in sacrificial procedures, material preparation, and the highly specific timing of rituals. Students were forced to memorize exhaustive catalogs of the appropriate offerings for different occasions, learning the exact technical knowledge required for proper ritual execution. The formalization of sacrificial education created hard institutional mechanisms that guaranteed the perfectly accurate transmission of complex procedural knowledge entirely independent of any individual practitioner's expertise. Mesopotamian texts preserve the dramatic accounts of a primordial rebellion, a time when minor deities revolted against their assigned labor obligations, ultimately leading to the creation of humanity to take over these crushing tasks. The Epic of Atrahasis describes this rebellion in intense detail, including the highly specific grievances regarding working conditions and the tense negotiation process that resulted in the creation of humanity as the ultimate solution. The text presents these events not as some hazy mythological allegory, but as a hard historical record of a labor dispute and its resolution through massive technological innovation. The creation of humanity is framed as a deliberate engineering project designed specifically to solve operational problems facing the divine administration. The Epic of Atrahasis opens with a stark description of the cosmic labor system put in place right after the primordial division of responsibilities among the great gods. The text specifies that the minor deities, the Ijigi, numbering 600, were handed the brutal responsibility of agricultural labor, irrigation maintenance, and canal construction tasks absolutely necessary to organize the newly separated earth. These minor deities worked under the heavy supervision of the great gods Anu, Enlil, and Enki, creating a hierarchical labor organization that perfectly mirrored human administrative structures. The highly systematic description of divine work assignments frames cosmic organization as a strict bureaucracy rather than a mystical religious setting. The brutal working conditions that finally triggered the Igigi rebellion are documented in deep detail within the text, including specific complaints about the crushing intensity of the workload, totally inadequate rest periods, and overly strict supervision. The Igigi toiled for 3,600 years, digging irrigation canals and maintaining waterways without a single moment of relief. The text describes how the minor gods endured the drudgery, carried massive heavy baskets, and suffered terribly under the crushing weight of their labor oppression. These deeply detailed descriptions of working conditions and grievances draw striking parallels with the documentation of human labor disputes in administrative texts, strongly suggesting the narrative preserved the genuine institutional memory of the massive challenges involved in labor organization. The rebellion itself receives a highly dramatic treatment, describing exactly how the Igigi simply stopped working, burned their tools, and marched directly on Enlil's temple to demand relief from their oppressive working conditions. The text notes that the rebellion kicked off at night, with the minor gods surrounding Enlil's temple and demanding immediate negotiations with divine management. This nocturnal timing and highly organized collective action showcase serious strategic planning and coordination among the rebel workers. The narrative frames the rebellion as a completely legitimate worker protest against unfair conditions, rather than framing it as a criminal mutiny against legitimate authority. The negotiation process that followed the rebellion showcases highly sophisticated conflict resolution procedures involving intense mediation and creative problem-solving. Enlil initially responded with sheer rage, threatening the rebel workers with brutal sanctions. However, Enki stepped in, proposing the creation of replacement workers who could shoulder the crushing tasks of the Ajigi, allowing the divine workers to return to much more appropriate activities. The text describes long, intense discussions among the great gods, weighing different solutions and their potential fallout. This deeply deliberative process presents divine governance as something operating through rational discussion and consensus building, rather than through arbitrary, booming divine decrees. The ultimate decision to create humanity as the solution to the labor crisis is explicitly presented as a technological innovation, engineered to solve highly specific operational problems. Enki's proposal specified that the replacement workers had to possess just enough intelligence to understand instructions and execute complex tasks, but absolutely had to lack the capabilities that might allow them to ever challenge divine authority. The design specifications for humanity carefully balanced multiple competing requirements: sheer physical strength for brutal labor, intellectual capacity to follow complex instructions, and reproductive capability to maintain the workforce without requiring constant divine intervention. Implementing the creation project involved highly systematic experimental procedures, testing different approaches, and refining the results based entirely on observed performance. The text describes how the early prototypes completely failed to meet the design requirements, exhibiting various flaws that demanded correction through modified procedures. This iterative development process proves a deep understanding that technological development requires rigorous experimentation and refinement, rather than achieving instant perfection on the first try. The careful documentation of these failures and subsequent corrections preserves genuine knowledge about systematic problem-solving through experimental methodology. Resolving the primordial rebellion through technological innovation laid down the fundamental models that would eventually characterize all of human civilization. The creation of humanity as a hard technological solution to a labor problem set a massive precedent for addressing challenges through innovation rather than through conflict. The narrative framework presenting this creation as a direct response to specific operational needs gave the Mesopotamians a clear understanding of humanity's purpose, a purely productive function within the cosmic order. This highly utilitarian view of human origins stood in stark contrast to creation narratives emphasizing divine generosity or grand moral designs. Instead, presenting humanity as a highly pragmatic solution to a very practical problem. Preserving the rebellion narratives through ritual recitation guaranteed these accounts were passed down through the generations, while simultaneously reinforcing social hierarchies. The annual New Year festivals featured ceremonial recitations of the Epic of Atrahasis, constantly reminding the participants of humanity's origins and its ongoing, unbreakable obligations to divine authorities. These ritual performances transformed abstract narratives into deeply embodied experiences that reinforced heavy cultural values regarding labor authority and social order. The strict institutional preservation of the rebellion narratives through regular ritual performance proves their immense importance in maintaining social stability and legitimizing hierarchical structures. Sumerian texts describe kingship as something that physically descended from heaven during the primordial period, established as the absolute, proper system for organizing human society according to divine principles. The Sumerian King List kicks off with the bold claim that after kingship had descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu, framing royal authority as a purely divine institution rather than a human innovation. Archaeological evidence from the earliest Sumerian cities reveals governmental structures and administrative systems that appear completely developed, rather than showing any kind of gradual evolution from simpler forms. The sheer sophistication of these administrative systems, including meticulous record-keeping and strict hierarchical organization, perfectly backs up the textual accounts describing kingship as an established institution, rather than an emerging political development. The concept of kingship as a celestial gift, rather than a human political innovation, permeates Sumerian political theology, establishing divine sanction as the absolutely essential foundation for legitimate royal authority. The formulaic opening of the Sumerian King List, preserved on multiple tablets including the Weld Blundell prism, dating to roughly 1900 BCE, explicitly declares that kingship descended from heaven as a fully complete institutional package, rather than emerging through any kind of gradual political development. This heavy theological framework presented royal governance as the direct application of divine administrative principles on earth, rather than representing human political innovation or some early social contract. The administrative sophistication documented in the absolute oldest Sumerian government records demonstrates capabilities that wildly exceed expectations for supposedly nascent political institutions. Economic texts from the Jemdet Nasser period, around 3000 BCE, reveal incredibly complex accounting systems used for tracking agricultural production, managing labor allocation, and distributing resources across massive territories. These administrative tablets employ highly standardized notation systems, strict hierarchical organizational structures, and sophisticated mathematical calculations that point to fully mature bureaucratic institutions. The total absence of simpler precursor systems in the archaeological record strongly reinforces the textual claims that governmental institutions were established according to predetermined organizational blueprints. The royal insignia, described in Sumerian texts as the absolutely essential components of legitimate kingship, are given highly detailed specifications indicating their function as the literal material embodiment of divine authority. The crown, the scepter, and the throne appear constantly in royal imagery and coronation rituals as physical objects that actually transmit legitimate authority rather than just serving as symbolic ornaments. Temple texts describe these royal insignias as being part of the me, the fundamental cosmic principles established during primordial organization. Materializing authority into specific physical objects created a highly transferable sovereignty that could easily pass from one ruler to the next through tightly controlled ceremonial procedures, rather than requiring a fresh divine intervention for every single succession. Coronation rituals, documented in the temple archives, preserve incredibly detailed procedures for transferring kingship from divine hands to human hands through ceremonial installation. These rituals, conducted in the massive temple complexes of Nippur and Uruk, involved elaborate purification ceremonies, the ritual investiture with the royal insignia, and formal recognition by the assembled deities represented by their cult statues. The sheer complexity of these coronation procedures and their flawless preservation across centuries proves the deep institutional commitment to maintaining the exact proper protocols for legitimizing royal authority. The intense ritualization of the transfer of power created highly predictable succession mechanisms that deeply stabilized political transitions. The relationship between divine kingship and earthly governance created a dual sovereignty, where human kings ruled as literal representatives implementing divine policies, rather than acting as autonomous political authorities. Royal inscriptions systematically frame the kings as being hand-picked by specific deities to fulfill predetermined roles within the cosmic order. This heavy theological framework severely limited royal authority by subjecting it to divine oversight, while simultaneously legitimizing that exact same royal power through celestial sanction. The delicate balance between divine authorization and divine limitation created governmental systems where kings held massive practical authority while remaining theoretically totally subordinate to cosmic law. The administrative infrastructure supporting royal governance showcases a sophistication in information management and bureaucratic organization that easily rivals modern governmental systems. The archives of the Temple of Girsu, dating to the 3rd dynasty of Ur, around 2100 BCE, hold tens of thousands of administrative tablets, documenting absolutely every aspect of state operations. These records track the agricultural output of individual fields, monitor the labor assignments of thousands of workers, log the collection of tribute from subjugated territories, and carefully document diplomatic correspondence with foreign powers. The sheer exhaustiveness and precision of this administrative documentation point to incredibly highly developed bureaucratic capabilities. The legal codes promulgated by Mesopotamian kings demonstrate a highly systematic codification of legal principles and procedural norms that completely transformed customary law into a fully documented legal system. The Code of Ur-Nammu, dating to around 2100 BCE, and representing the absolute oldest known code of law, prescribes highly specific penalties for clearly defined offenses, lays down strict procedural requirements for legal proceedings, and creates massive institutional mechanisms for conflict resolution. The systematic organization of legal principles into written codes transformed the administration of justice from arbitrary judicial discretion into a strict, rules-based system operating on documented standards. This legal codification proves an immense governmental sophistication in creating institutional frameworks that completely transcended individual rulers. The territorial organization of Sumerian city-states reveals highly systematic approaches to geographic administration that created deeply hierarchical governance structures. The massive urban centers functioned as administrative capitals, governing the surrounding agricultural territories and their subordinate settlements. Temple records document the exact division of territories into administrative districts, each overseen by appointed officials, strictly responsible for tax collection, labor mobilization, and the maintenance of order. This highly hierarchical territorial organization created governance systems fully capable of administering massive populations and vast territories through strictly delegated authority and highly standardized procedures. Integrating religious and political authority directly into the person of the king created governance systems where temporal and spiritual powers seamlessly merged into a single unified administration. Kings served simultaneously as the ultimate political leaders and the chief priests, perfectly blending governmental authority with heavy ritual responsibilities. This fusion of religious and political roles effectively prevented the rise of competing power centers that might have challenged royal authority, while guaranteeing that all governmental activities remained perfectly aligned with religious principles. The deep institutional integration of the temple and the palace created comprehensive governance systems that tackled both the material and spiritual dimensions of the social order. Sumerian agricultural texts describe the exact establishment of farming techniques during the primordial period directly under divine instruction. The text, known as the Farmer's Instructions, preserves incredibly detailed agricultural knowledge, covering plowing techniques, precise irrigation management, and complex crop rotation systems, all explicitly attributed to divine teaching. Archaeological evidence from the earliest Sumerian farming sites reveals massive irrigation networks and field management systems that demonstrate a highly sophisticated grasp of hydrology, soil science, and agricultural engineering. The sudden explosive appearance of these advanced agricultural capabilities perfectly confirms the textual accounts describing farming knowledge as a revealed technology, rather than a gradual, stumbling human innovation. The Farmer's Instructions, preserved on tablets from the Old Babylonian period, but clearly grounded in much older Sumerian sources, provides an exhaustive agricultural manual covering the entire farming cycle, from the initial field preparation all the way to the final harvest and storage. The text kicks off with highly detailed instructions for prepping the fields during the brutally hot summer months, specifying that farmers must repeatedly flood the fields to leach out accumulated salts in the soil and wipe out weed seeds. These preparation procedures show a deep understanding of soil chemistry and exactly how salinization destroys crop productivity. The sheer technical sophistication of these agricultural recommendations proves an access to systematic knowledge regarding soil management knowledge, developed through prolonged, intense observation and experimentation. The irrigation instructions preserved in these agricultural texts demonstrate a comprehensive, masterful understanding of water management principles and hydraulic engineering. The texts specify the absolute optimal water depths for different crops, lay out strict timing protocols for irrigation scheduling, and provide exact methods for calculating water requirements based on field size and soil type. These hydraulic calculations demand serious mathematical capabilities, including surface area measurement, volume estimation, and flow rate determination, all pointing to incredibly deep engineering knowledge. The precision of these irrigation instructions strongly suggests they stem from a highly systematic study of water behavior and crop requirements, rather than just casual observation. The plowing techniques detailed in the agricultural texts reveal an incredibly deep knowledge of soil mechanics and exactly how different tillage methods impact crop yields. The Farmer's Instructions stipulate that fields must be plowed 8 times, using entirely different plow configurations for each pass, creating the absolute optimal soil structure for seed germination and root development. The text details exactly how plowing depth must vary based on soil type and crop requirements, demanding deeper plowing for heavy soils and shallower cultivation for sandy soils. This highly nuanced approach to tillage proves a deep understanding that farming practices must be rigorously adapted to local soil conditions, rather than just blindly following universal procedures. The instructions for seed selection and planting preserved in these texts point to a serious grasp of genetic principles and plant breeding techniques. The texts specify that farmers must save the absolute best grains from each harvest to use as seed for the next planting, actively maintaining and boosting crop quality through rigorous selective breeding. The instructions for treating seeds before planting include soaking them in highly specific solutions and coating them with protective substances to fend off fungal diseases and insect damage. These seed prep techniques show a highly sophisticated understanding of plant pathology and pest management principles. The crop rotation systems detailed in Sumerian agricultural texts reveal a deep understanding of soil fertility dynamics and the massive benefits of alternating crops. The texts highly recommend rotating between cereal crops and legumes, and periodically leaving fields fallow to let the soil restore its productivity. This rotation practice prevented total soil exhaustion while still maintaining a massive, constant agricultural output across multiple growing seasons. The systematic application of these rotation principles proves the recognition that sustainable agriculture demands the highly active management of soils rather than just passively extracting natural fertility until it's gone. Archaeological evidence from ancient Mesopotamian farming sites absolutely confirms the sheer sophistication of the irrigation systems described in the textual sources. Excavations in the Diyala River Valley, conducted in the 1930s by the Oriental Institute, unearthed massive canal networks dating all the way back to the early dynastic period, around 2900 BCE. These irrigation systems integrated highly sophisticated engineering features, including flow control gates, settling basins to strip out sediment, and vast distribution networks that fed water to multiple field systems. The sheer scale and complexity of these hydraulic installations prove engineering capabilities that demanded a comprehensive, masterful understanding of water management principles. The agricultural productivity achieved through these Sumerian farming techniques allowed for unprecedented population densities and urban development never before seen in human history. Economic texts from the 3rd dynasty of Ur period document staggering grain yields, averaging around 30 bushels per acre levels of productivity that completely outpaced European agricultural output right up until the 19th century. These exceptional yields were the direct result of the integrated application of multiple advanced techniques, including highly controlled irrigation, fertilization, crop rotation, and genetic selection. The massive agricultural surplus generated by these intensive farming methods laid the absolute economic bedrock supporting urban civilization, highly specialized craft production, and deeply complex social hierarchies. The strict institutional preservation of agricultural knowledge through temple-based educational systems guaranteed these farming techniques were passed down flawlessly across generations. Agricultural texts were meticulously copied in the scribal schools as part of the standard curriculum, training future administrators in the exact technical knowledge required to manage massive agricultural production. This institutional preservation of farming knowledge created an incredibly stable baseline of agricultural practices that maintained high productivity despite massive political upheavals and dynastic shifts. The formalization of agricultural education proves the deep recognition that farming knowledge represented absolutely vital cultural capital that demanded systematic preservation and transmission. Sumerian metallurgical texts describe the discovery and use of metals as an event that happened right in the primordial period, under direct divine guidance. The text, known as The Debate Between Copper and Silver, preserves the ancient traditions regarding the establishment of metallurgy and its massive importance to civilization. Archaeological analysis of the very first Mesopotamian metal objects reveals highly sophisticated alloying techniques and fabrication processes that prove deeply advanced metallurgical knowledge. The exact precision of the alloy proportions and the sheer complexity of the smelting procedures observed in the oldest metal artifacts strongly suggest an access to comprehensive technical knowledge rather than a slow, stumbling experimental development of metallurgical capabilities. The debate between copper and silver. A literary composition preserved on tablets from the Old Babylonian period presents this metallurgical knowledge through the clever framing of a bragging contest between personified metals. Each metal lists off its massive contributions to civilization, aggressively arguing for its own superior value and utility. Copper heavily emphasizes its vital role in producing the tools, weapons, and vessels absolutely essential to daily life, while silver highlights its function as a medium of exchange and a supreme store of value. The technical accuracy of the metallurgical information baked right into this literary framework proves that poetic compositions could serve as highly effective vehicles for preserving and transmitting hard, practical, technical knowledge. The copper smelting procedures detailed in the technical texts demonstrate a highly sophisticated grasp of the chemical processes required to extract metal from raw ore. These procedures specify that copper ores had to be crushed down to a highly uniform particle size, mixed with incredibly specific proportions of charcoal, and then heated in furnaces specifically designed to reach and maintain temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The texts describe exactly how smelting required a highly controlled air supply to create a reducing atmosphere that facilitated metal extraction while completely preventing excessive oxidation. This deeply detailed specification of smelting parameters points to an exhaustive understanding of the exact chemical reactions involved in copper production. The bronze alloying techniques documented in the metallurgical texts reveal a highly precise knowledge of the absolute optimal proportions of copper and tin needed for different applications. The texts specify that tools and weapons needed to contain about 10% tin-creating alloys with the absolute optimal hardness and edge retention. Casting applications that demanded high fluidity for insanely detailed reproduction required a much higher tin content, pushing closer to 15 or 20%. These highly differentiated alloy specifications prove a deep understanding that material properties shift drastically based on their composition, and that the optimal formulation depends entirely on the intended use. The sheer precision of these metallurgical specs indicates they were born from highly systematic experimentation and deeply accumulated experience. Archaeological analysis of the earliest Mesopotamian metal artifacts perfectly confirms the technical sophistication described in the textual sources. Chemical analysis of bronze objects from the early dynastic period reveals alloy compositions that perfectly match the exact ratios specified in the metallurgical texts. Objects dating back to around 2700 BCE show incredibly consistent tin percentages, averaging between 9 and 11%, landing perfectly in the exact range recommended for tools and weapons. This stunning match between the archaeological evidence and the textual specifications completely validates the sheer accuracy of the preserved metallurgical knowledge. The casting techniques used to produce highly complex bronze objects demonstrate a total mastery of foundry procedures, including lost wax casting and the construction of complex piece molds. The archaeological discovery of clay molds in metalworking shops at Ur and other sites reveals highly sophisticated, multi-part mold designs that allowed for the production of objects with incredibly intricate details and hollow interiors. The technical knowledge required for successful casting includes a deep understanding of metal flow characteristics, solidification behavior, and highly precise thermal management during the cooling phase. The complexity of the casting procedures, proven by the archaeological evidence, indicates that Mesopotamian metalworkers possessed an exhaustive, masterful practical knowledge of foundry operations. The heat treatment procedures detailed in the metallurgical texts reveal a deep understanding that the properties of metals could be radically altered through highly controlled heating and cooling cycles. The texts describe exactly how copper and bronze objects had to be heated to highly specific temperatures and then immediately quenched in water or oil to massively increase their hardness. Other procedures involving incredibly slow cooling produced softer, far more ductile materials, perfectly suited for applications requiring high malleability. This deep understanding of exactly how heat treatment impacts mechanical properties shows off a highly sophisticated materials science knowledge that predated our formal scientific understanding of metallurgical phase transformations by several millennia. The mining and ore processing techniques, absolutely necessary for metal production, demonstrate massive capabilities in extractive technologies and mineral processing. Archaeological research into ancient copper mines in the Arava Valley and other regions reveals highly sophisticated mining operations, including deep shaft excavation, ore extraction, and complex beneficiation procedures that heavily concentrated the copper content long before smelting even began. The massive organizational complexity required for these mining ops, including managing a huge workforce, producing specialized tools, and handling the brutal logistics of transporting ore back to the smelting sites, points to staggering technical and administrative capabilities supporting the entire metallurgical production line. The social and economic impacts of metallurgy completely transformed Mesopotamian civilization, unlocking totally new technologies, sparking highly specialized craft industries, and establishing metal as the ultimate medium of exchange. The widespread availability of bronze tools massively boosted agricultural productivity, totally revolutionized military capabilities, and allowed for incredibly sophisticated craft production. The sheer value of metal objects created entirely new forms of wealth that could be hoarded, stored, and transferred far more efficiently than bulky agricultural products. The explosive development of metallurgy acted as a massive catalyst for economic and social transformations that fundamentally rewired the entire organization of Mesopotamian society. Medical texts describe healing knowledge as something firmly established during the primordial period, right when the goddess Ninhursag and the god Enki organized medicinal plants and laid down the exact proper treatment protocols. These medical traditions, carefully preserved in the temple archives, include highly sophisticated pharmaceutical recipes, complex surgical procedures, and diagnostic methods that prove an exhaustive, masterful understanding of human anatomy and biochemistry. Archaeological discoveries of medical equipment and the chemical analysis of ancient pharmaceutical preps completely confirm the technical accuracy of the textual descriptions. This strongly indicates that highly advanced medical knowledge was preserved intact right from that primordial establishment, rather than being slowly developed through stumbling progressive experimentation. The medical corpus preserved in both Sumerian and Akkadian texts encompasses a massive, comprehensive knowledge of diseases, treatments, and prognostic indicators, all meticulously organized into vast medical reference works. The diagnostic series, known as the Diagnostic Handbook, compiled during the 2nd millennium BCE, but heavily incorporating much older material, details hundreds of pathological conditions strictly organized by the affected body systems. Each entry provides incredibly detailed descriptions of symptoms, strict criteria for differential diagnosis, and highly practical prognostic evaluations that showcase deeply sophisticated clinical observation and a highly systematic categorization of medical knowledge. The sheer exhaustiveness of this medical literature proves that Mesopotamian physicians possessed vast, deeply empirical knowledge regarding disease patterns and treatment outcomes. The pharmaceutical recipes preserved in these medical texts demonstrate a highly sophisticated grasp of the properties of medicinal plants and the strict principles of drug preparation. These recipes specify exactly which plant materials to use, detail the precise preparation methods, including complex extraction, concentration, and combination procedures, and dictate the absolute optimal administration routes for totally different pathologies. The texts draw a hard line between internal medications taken orally, external applications for skin diseases, and highly specialized preparations for the eyes, ears, and other highly specific bodily regions. This rigidly systematic organization of pharmaceutical knowledge proves a deep understanding that completely different administration methods and formulations were absolutely required for different therapeutic applications. The surgical procedures detailed in the medical texts reveal serious capabilities for highly invasive interventions that demanded deeply detailed anatomical knowledge and massive technical skill. The texts document intense procedures, including the draining of abscesses, cataract surgery, the reduction of brutal fractures, and complex wound management that completely prove a heavy, practical surgical experience. The descriptions include highly specific requirements for surgical instruments, exact patient positioning, and wound closure techniques that draw stunning parallels with modern surgical principles. The strict preservation of surgical knowledge through textual transmission guaranteed that these highly technical procedures could be learned through rigorous study and practice, rather than forcing every generation to rediscover them through brutal trial and error. Archaeological discoveries of actual medical instruments completely confirm the reality of the surgical procedures described in the texts. Excavations at various Mesopotamian sites have recovered highly specialized bronze surgical instruments, including scalpels, probes, forceps, and tools designed for incredibly specific interventions. These instruments showcase a highly sophisticated metallurgical craftsmanship, producing razor-sharp edges, incredibly precise points for delicate work, and highly ergonomic designs that made surgical manipulation significantly easier. The hard physical proof of specialized surgical equipment perfectly validates the textual descriptions of invasive medical interventions, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that Mesopotamian medicine absolutely included surgery, right alongside pharmaceutical treatments. Chemical analysis of residues found inside ancient pharmaceutical vessels provides hard material proof, confirming the absolute accuracy of the drug preparation instructions preserved in the medical texts. Analyzing pottery fragments from temple pharmacies has identified organic residues, including plant alkaloids, mineral compounds, and animal products that perfectly match the exact ingredients specified in the pharmaceutical recipes. The chemical signatures of these residues point to highly specific preparation methods, notably controlled heating, fermentation, and solvent extraction, which perfectly match the exact procedures detailed in the medical texts. This tight correlation between the chemical evidence and the textual descriptions completely validates the technical accuracy of the preserved pharmaceutical knowledge. The diagnostic procedures laid out in the medical texts demonstrate highly systematic approaches to patient evaluation, grounded entirely in meticulous observation and strictly established clinical criteria. The texts instruct physicians to conduct a highly comprehensive examination of their patients, carefully noting physical signs like skin color, body temperature, pulse characteristics, respiratory rhythms, and any excretory abnormalities. This deeply comprehensive approach to the physical exam generated massive amounts of diagnostic information, allowing the physician to successfully differentiate between very similar pathologies and select the absolute correct treatments. The highly systematic nature of these diagnostic procedures proves that Mesopotamian medicine operated according to strictly standardized clinical methods, rather than relying on hazy, intuitive healing practices. Integrating medical practice directly into the temple institutions created massive organizational frameworks for preserving and transmitting medical knowledge. Temple complexes housed fully functional medical facilities, complete with treatment rooms, dedicated pharmaceutical prep areas, and massive archives of medical texts. The tight association between medicine and religious institutions guaranteed that medical knowledge received massive institutional support and protection, while simultaneously creating highly structured educational systems for training new practitioners. This rock-solid institutional foundation for medical practice allowed for the massive accumulation and flawless preservation of clinical knowledge across countless generations of healers. The therapeutic approaches detailed in the medical texts demonstrate a profound understanding that a treatment absolutely must target the underlying pathological processes, rather than just merely suppressing the surface symptoms. The texts draw a very hard line between symptomatic treatments that offered immediate relief and curative interventions that aggressively attacked the actual root causes of the disease. This deep conceptual distinction between palliation and true healing points to incredibly sophisticated thinking regarding disease mechanisms and therapeutic strategies. The heavy emphasis on curative treatments proves a deep commitment to actually restoring health, rather than just endlessly managing chronic conditions. Sumerian texts describe exactly how primordial knowledge was deliberately sealed away in subterranean repositories to preserve it through times of massive catastrophe and cultural upheaval. The Eridu Genesis and other primordial narratives reference the establishment of these massive knowledge preservation systems long before the Great Flood, absolutely guaranteeing that essential information would survive for future civilizations. Archaeological discoveries of deeply sealed chambers beneath the massive temple complexes reveal highly sophisticated preservation systems specifically designed to protect texts and artifacts across millennia. These subterranean vaults held not just written archives, but actual technological artifacts and material samples that allowed for the rapid rebuilding of advanced capabilities in the wake of catastrophic disruptions. The highly systematic nature of these preservation efforts proves that protecting knowledge was meticulously planned and executed according to exhaustive protocols established right in the primordial period. The concept of deliberately preserving knowledge through physical repositories represents a highly sophisticated understanding of just how vulnerable information really is, and the absolute necessity of redundant storage systems. Sumerian texts explicitly describe massive efforts to protect essential knowledge from being wiped out by natural disasters, wars, and cultural collapse, by creating heavily sealed archives in deeply protected locations. The Eridu Genesis describes exactly how the god Enki warned specific individuals about the impending flood and ordered them to preserve written knowledge by sealing tablets deep inside subterranean chambers. This narrative framework presents knowledge preservation as a highly intentional project, demanding massive planning and resource allocation rather than just relying on the lucky accidental survival of random documents. Hard archaeological evidence of subterranean chambers built beneath the massive temple complexes perfectly confirms the textual accounts of these deliberate knowledge repositories. Excavations at Eridu, Nippur, and Uruk have revealed vast underground installations, extending way beyond any structural requirements for temple foundations. These subterranean chambers incorporate highly sophisticated construction techniques, including completely waterproof bitumen barriers, advanced drainage systems to totally block groundwater infiltration, and complex ventilation setups that maintained perfectly stable atmospheric conditions. The massive engineering effort poured into creating these protected underground spaces proves that their construction served incredibly important functions, far beyond just simple storage. The preservation technologies employed inside these subterranean vaults demonstrate a highly advanced understanding of the environmental factors that degrade materials. The chambers incorporated climate control features that maintained incredibly stable temperature and humidity levels, totally preventing the rotting of organic materials like clay tablets, papyrus, and textile artifacts. Chemical treatments applied directly to the chamber walls created highly antimicrobial environments that completely stopped biological degradation. The sophisticated preservation systems baked right into the vault designs prove that the builders deeply understood the exact environmental requirements for long-term material survival, and deliberately engineered spaces to meet those exact demands. The way materials were organized inside these subterranean vaults reveals highly systematic approaches to storing and retrieving information. Archaeological investigation of the accessible chambers shows that the material was strictly organized by subject, with totally distinct storage zones for different fields of knowledge, including astronomical texts, medical documents, mathematical tablets, and ritual instructions. This highly systematic organization allowed for the incredibly efficient retrieval of specific information whenever the vaults were accessed. The deliberate, meticulous organization of the stored materials proves that these repositories were designed for highly active use, rather than just serving as a passive dumping ground. The sheer redundancy built right into these knowledge preservation systems through the creation of multiple vaults across completely different sites demonstrates a profound grasp of risk management principles. Hugely important texts were meticulously copied and deposited in archives across multiple temple sites, absolutely guaranteeing that the destruction of a single vault would never result in the total loss of that knowledge. Administrative records from the temples document the constant exchange of texts between different cities, creating massive, decentralized archive networks that hugely increased preservation security. This highly decentralized approach to knowledge storage perfectly echoes our modern data backup strategies, which heavily prioritize geographic redundancy, including actual technological artifacts and material samples right alongside the written records inside these subterranean vaults, proves a deep recognition that certain types of knowledge simply could not be adequately preserved through text alone. Archaeological discoveries inside these sealed chambers include raw metal samples, mineral specimens, medicinal plants, and actual physical tools that perfectly demonstrated manufacturing techniques and safely preserved vital genetic resources. Combining written instructions with hard physical examples created massive comprehensive knowledge preservation systems that kept both theoretical understanding and highly practical capabilities perfectly intact. The timeline for sealing these vaults, as described in the flood narratives, indicates that knowledge preservation activities kicked into high gear during anticipated periods of crisis, rather than just happening during times of peace and stability. The texts describe exactly how the vaults were sealed shut when catastrophic events appeared imminent, strongly suggesting that preservation protocols were triggered as a direct response to highly specific threats. This crisis-driven preservation activity proves that these knowledge protection systems functioned as highly organized disaster preparedness protocols, rather than just routine archive maintenance. Reopening the sealed vaults after a catastrophe, exactly as described in the Sumerian texts, frames the recovery of knowledge as the absolutely essential first step in rebuilding civilization. The narratives describe how the survivors immediately accessed the sealed chambers after the floodwaters receded, retrieving the preserved knowledge that allowed for the incredibly rapid reconstruction of urban civilization. This knowledge recovery framework perfectly explains exactly how highly sophisticated technologies and massive institutions could suddenly reappear right after catastrophic upheavals, rather than requiring centuries of agonizing gradual redevelopment. Baking knowledge recovery procedures right into the preservation systems demonstrates a massively exhaustive planning process that perfectly anticipated both the initial storage and the eventual necessary retrieval of the protected information. The heavy influence of Mesopotamian knowledge preservation concepts on later civilizations is glaringly obvious in similar traditions found across Egyptian, Hebrew, and Greek sources, all describing an ancient wisdom sealed away in hidden vaults, just waiting to be discovered. These stunningly parallel traditions strongly suggest that preserving knowledge through subterranean archives represented an incredibly widespread ancient practice, rather than just an isolated Mesopotamian quirk. The sheer consistency of these preservation narratives across completely different cultures indicates either deep shared cultural contacts or a totally independent recognition of the exact same requirements for protecting knowledge. The hard archaeological confirmation of genuine subterranean vaults completely validates these textual traditions, proving that ancient civilizations invested staggering amounts of resources into protecting their accumulated knowledge from being totally wiped out by catastrophic upheavals. The sheer weight of the evidence gathered across all these fields of investigation points toward conclusions that fundamentally challenge our conventional understanding of human civilization's development and the true nature of how knowledge has been transmitted across the millennia. The Sumerian archives describing the events before any beginning have preserved not mythological speculation, but the systematic documentation of the actual primordial organization that laid down the frameworks in which human civilization would eventually grow. The stunning coherence between the textual accounts and the archaeological evidence, the technical precision of the preserved procedures, and the sophisticated integration of multiple fields of knowledge all indicate that these ancient records passed down genuine information, not just religious fantasies. The sudden appearance of advanced capabilities across so many technological and institutional domains during the 4th millennium BCE simply cannot be adequately explained by conventional models of gradual cultural evolution. Urbanism, writing systems, mathematical notation, astronomical observation, metallurgical techniques, agricultural engineering, medical knowledge, and governmental institutions all emerged fully formed. There are no clear developmental steps in the archaeological record. This simultaneous burst of sophisticated capabilities in diverse fields supports the Sumerian claims that civilizing knowledge descended from heaven as a complete package, rather than accumulating through centuries of human trial and error. The mathematical precision underlying the Sumerian knowledge system demonstrates capabilities that far exceeded the practical needs of an agricultural society. This suggests access to an advanced understanding that originated far beyond the normal paths of cultural development. The base 60 numerical system, the complex astronomical calculations, the precise architectural proportions, and the principles of systematic organization all reflect a theoretical knowledge that could only stem from sustained intellectual investigation, or from transmission by external sources possessing an exhaustive understanding of the cosmos. The integration of this mathematical knowledge into practical applications created civilizational capabilities that laid the bedrock for human development over the ensuing millennia. The preservation of primordial knowledge through institutional mechanisms, including temple archives, scribal education, and subterranean repositories, guaranteed the transmission of essential information through the catastrophic upheavals that wiped out surface civilizations. The deliberate construction of knowledge preservation systems shows a deep understanding that the survival of a civilization requires the active protection of accumulated wisdom rather than a passive reliance on cultural memory. The archaeological confirmation of sealed repositories and the documented survival of technical knowledge through political collapses validates just how effective these preservation strategies truly were. The cyclical model hinted at by the flood narratives and preservation protocols indicates that Mesopotamian civilizations understood their own development as a recurring process, rather than a unique, one-time historical event. The divide between the antediluvian and post-diluvian periods, the systematic preservation of knowledge before anticipated catastrophes, and the protocols for recovering that knowledge after disasters. All of this points to an awareness that the rise of civilization followed cyclical patterns, involving growth, catastrophic disruption, and reconstruction using preserved wisdom. This cyclical view of history stands in stark contrast to modern assumptions of linear progress. It raises profound questions about whether contemporary civilization is truly the first time humanity has reached advanced technological capabilities. The relevance of these ancient knowledge preservation systems to our modern world becomes glaringly obvious when we consider our own current vulnerabilities to catastrophic disruptions. whether from natural disasters, wars, or technological failures. The Sumerian recognition that knowledge requires active protection and that the continuity of civilization depends entirely on the successful transmission of information through upheavals provides a framework for understanding how to preserve our own essential capabilities during times of crisis. The integration of written documentation with physical artifacts, the geographical distribution of archives, and the institutional mechanisms for transmitting knowledge all offer principles directly applicable to our modern preservation challenges. The evidence presented throughout this investigation suggests that humanity's relationship with knowledge and technology might be far more complex than conventional historical narratives are willing to admit. The possibility that advanced capabilities were transmitted rather than independently developed, that civilizations have risen and fallen in cycles spanning vast stretches of time, and that essential knowledge was deliberately preserved through catastrophic upheavals, all challenge our most fundamental assumptions about human progress and cultural development. As contemporary civilization faces its own array of existential challenges, the ancient Sumerian understanding of knowledge preservation and cyclical renewal might just provide the crucial lessons we need to ensure that human achievements survive whatever disruptions the future may hold.